There you are, Bob.
There we go. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 4 of the Fantasy Football Summit, brought to you by my friend Emil Kadlik and co-worker, and a group of a host of great guests. And once again tonight, we have another round of great guests. I'll set the table for you before we bring on Armando Marsal to talk a little in-season stuff. We're going to go DFS heavy, yes. It is true. I see you over there in the chat windows. We're going to start out with Armando tonight, talking a little in-season draft strategy, in-season management. We're going to go to Casey Joyner from ESPN, the fantasy scientist. If you have not seen his work, it's amazing. He does great stuff. A lot of focus on the offensive line, blocking. Offensive lines matter, everybody, and he does a great job with those. He'll be on at 9 o'clock. 9:30, we'll have Bobby Gomez, DraftKings Millionaire Maker winner. He'll be talking the obvious winning methods for DFS strategy. Armando will come back then at 10 p.m. talk DFS strategy, DFS tips for all different kinds of contests. Good stuff there. Jen Ryan will come on at 10:30 to talk DFS and gambling techniques. They kind of intertwine and dovetail, so that's a helpful thing. And then we'll close out the night with the one and only Jeff Mans from Guru Elite. He will be talking his elite DFS strategies. I'll be watching your questions. Everyone chime in. I see some of the regulars here. Appreciate your presence, and thank you for taking the time to watch this again. Should be another entertaining night. I'm going to turn it over to Armando Marsal from footballdiehards.com. Armando, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Bob. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic, and let's get the ball rolling with some draft strategy and in-season management talk. Started out with the draft strategy. Let's go.
Yeah, so something that goes completely overlooked, and it seems like very obvious to me, and I see it all the time, is league settings, knowing your roster settings. It happens all the time. I've seen it multiple times where I'm in the league or I'm drafting, and someone asks, "Is this a PPR format, or is this standard? This half point PPR?" I think that's so important to just go into a league knowing your scoring settings and your roster settings. If you're starting 3 receivers, if you're starting, 2 receivers, how many flex slots there is in your league. So I think that's very important. I think that goes very overlooked when you're preparing for a draft. And once you have all that information, I think you can then start prepping. If you've been in a league for quite some time, I've been in my home league for, I want to say now, 12 years. You start, if you're drafting with the same people, you start understanding their tendencies, understanding their strategy. So I'm the type of person where when someone's zigging, I'm zagging. I know Bob, you draft very similar in that aspect. So knowing your league, knowing how people draft in your league, knowing what the tendency is very, very important to me. And understanding how, is there limitations as far as how many receivers, how many running backs, how many quarterbacks, how many tight ends you can take. I think that's very, very important as you're preparing for the draft. And then once you got all that information, I immediately start doing mock drafts. I'm reading up on news all year round. If there's any coaching changes, I think that's very important. If there's any personnel changes this year, we had a lot of players move to a new team, and that moving to a new team really changes things, changes numbers that we saw last year that were taken into consideration when we were drafting this year, that we're not going to really be able to put those numbers with what we're expecting this season because of the changes. So I think that's something very, very important when you're preparing for these drafts. I follow ADP. I do because I want to know where players are going, but I personally do not, draft based on ADP. Quite frankly, I throw ADP out the window. I have an article on footballdiehards.com, kind of going very in depth about ADP and why I don't really place too much emphasis. I just use it as it gives me an idea of where to draft it. Taking my guy, I have no issue being one of my rounds here. Someone that in my right now is like Cooper Cup. I really this season. He's going in late 8th round, 10th round. I really don't mind format in a sense because I have high I can get floor and when I like to take a balance approach. I like taking guys early on that provide nice, but aren't too volatile. I'm minimizing my risk really with. I like to take, a bit of forward in most leagues, unless you're in keeper leagues or dynasty leagues. But in most formats, the first round pretty straightforward. Once you get to third, fourth, I'm it depends on how I go the first couple of rounds. If I draft players that are very safe, I don't mind taking a flyer by Hilton that he can be on a week basis. Yet the end of the season numbers are going to be several. Understanding the type of players you're drafting, it a very balanced roster. For me, something I like to do for this best ball strategy, best ball different. Just regular PPR or standard. I like to do a very, very balanced approach with my roster, and what as much risk as possible, because on a week basis in these type of leagues. Now, I leave kickers and defense rounds. I really do have interest in drafting these positions any earlier. And the last round have a unique score. Defenses and kickers are more valuable. In most cases, they're kickers. These are two positions I find are very streamable on a regular basis. We do streaming articles. You'll be able to see some of those.
Hey, Armando.
Yes.
Hey, Armando, we're having a little issues with your sound. Sounds like your connection's rolling a little bit down. We're going to try and rehook you up. I'm going to jump out here and take over for a brief moment. And something Armando mentioned is, watching the player movement, watching the coaching changes. I think that's a really big deal every year, something we should all do. And I know in this room, everybody's doing that kind of stuff. But I think some of the changes this year could really play into our hands. You look at Arizona. We bring in Steve Wilkes as the head coach, right? And, what's our concern there? We're concerned with two guys, David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald. What are they going to do? And I think with a pass-heavy play calling of Mike McCoy, we're in pretty good shape with those guys. I was going to go deeper into this, but I'm like, I actually see Armando this time, which is a pretty good sign. Armando, jump back up here. Let's see how you sound.
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know what happened there. You see me? You guys hear me? All right. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. Yeah, I mean, you were getting into detail about that, Bob, and I think you do have to take a lot into consideration. One guy that some people have skepticism about this season is David Johnson. There was a coaching change there. There's quarterback change. So there are a lot of changes, but I still think, considering his role on this offense and what we can expect from him and what he's able to do, he's a pass catcher out of the backfield. He's a very, very good runner. I don't think it changes much. We saw him be a top fantasy running back a couple years back, and I think he could get back to that form, even though all the changes have occurred on this offense. There's one team in New England that they're a well-oiled machine. We've been used to seeing them, dominate the league. I think there's a lot of concerns there. There haven't been coaching changes, but there's offensive line changes. The man who was protecting Brady is now protecting Eli Manning in New York. So I think that's something that many people might not be aware of, or many people might overlook. And I think that really will affect this offense a little bit. Along with some of the players that are no longer there. Danny Amendola is in Miami now. Julian Edelman is going to miss the first several weeks of the season. So I think there's a lot of moving parts, and this offense could probably start off slow. Not to take anything away from Brady, I think he's one of the greatest quarterbacks to play the game, if not the greatest of all time. But these kind of things really do impact offenses and just teams and production in general. So I think that's something that really has to be focused on when you're preparing for your draft. You have all the off season to prepare. You have all this time to look into this, look at the changes, look at the scheme changes. It's just so important. And these are things you don't see on stat lines. These are things you don't see, when you're looking at fantasy stats or when you're looking at projections. It's just not anything that's right there. It's just, this is tidbits and pieces of information that you have to gather yourself, by doing the research and doing the reading, and putting it all into perspective when you're making a decision on a player. So once you understand the scoring system and understand your league settings and how your league works, you'll start becoming more aware of the value of each position. And I was talking to Bob before the show, and I looked at the point differential. A lot of people take shots at quarterbacks early. I'm one that drafts quarterbacks later because I just don't see the difference in fantasy production on a week-to-week basis. And when I look at the top 10 quarterbacks, last season, the average fantasy points per game was 19.4. And when you look at quarterbacks 11 through 20, it was 16.2. It's a 3-point differential on a week-to-week basis. Now, I ran these same numbers for running backs, and when you look at the top 10 running backs, the average was 18.5 fantasy points. And when you look at 11 through 20, average was 13 fantasy points. Now we're talking about a much more significant difference, which is why I like really loading up on running backs and receivers early on in the drafts, and then I'll focus on quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses, and kickers much later in the draft. I'm not saying wait all draft for it, but be wary of the depth of each position and the difference on a week-to-week basis that these players give. Now, I make every round count. I do plenty of research. I do plenty of analyzing throughout the season. I watch preseason because in the late rounds, I might grab a guy who had a good preseason, but is maybe an injury away from having a big role, and I think that that's very important. So my last round, I'm always looking for a player who has potential upside. Who sometimes we find veteran players that are not the sexiest names and not the biggest upside plays, but these are players that are going to have a role on their offense. They're productive on occasions, and typically will not give you a zero. So when I'm drafting the later rounds, these are the type of players I'm looking for. I really like to mix and match young players, rookies, maybe second-year guys, players on offense that they haven't had their shot just yet, but could be in for a big role, at some point in the season. Baker Mayfield is someone that could eventually, or I expect eventually, to start. There's a ton of weapons on this Cleveland Browns offense. So he might not be consistent on a week-to-week basis, but you could snag him in a really late round and have yourself a potential starter later down the road. I'm taking that kind of strategy in 2 quarterback leagues specifically because you can never have too much depth at quarterback in those type of leagues. Depth is something that I feel is very, very important. I like to have at least 6, 7, 8 running backs. The same can be said about receivers, and in PPR format specifically, I like targeting pass catching backs. They might not be receiving the bulk of the carries on a week-to-week basis, but these are players that are going to get catches out of the backfield and provide a nice safe floor for fantasy owners. So to me, that really, really makes a big difference, and it really helps me in the early rounds, because if I don't get the workhorse, or if I don't get a couple of every down backs, I can focus on loading up a bunch of pass catching backs. Just to name a few is Duke Johnson, Theo Reddick. These are guys that are not productive on a week-to-week basis, but they do provide some decent floors and could be an interesting flex option during bye weeks and if an injury occurs to your roster. And last but not least, have fun. Have fun. There's so many things you can do, but at the end of the day, it's fantasy football. Enjoy the league you're in. Have fun. Have a good time, and just try your best to get all the information that you have during this time that you're prepping, and make the best decision. We cannot control the end result at the end of the day.
But fun is winning, and a lot of the things you mentioned come from winning. And a question out here I just got was, what if the draft flows towards quarterbacks early, like in the second round? Do you and does that maybe give you no choice but to pick a QB early. And my initial thought is, and it's something you mentioned with the running backs and the quarterbacks, look at the weekly scoring averages in your league, right? See the difference between the top 10 and the next 10. You might be surprised at what you find. Barring a really odd scoring system, they're going to be closer than you think, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big, a big thing when you really dig into the numbers. And this is just, I just gave the 2017, but in 2016, the difference between the top 10 quarterbacks and quarterbacks 11 through 20 average on a week-to-week basis was just 2 fantasy points per game. It's not significant. Now, running back, it's huge. So you definitely want to take these.
The key to that, though, too, is, quarterback is not a position of scarcity. So it plays into our hands in 2 ways. The scoring is close. And in addition, while other guys are drafting quarterbacks early and burning draft capital, you're going to be drafting positions of scarcity, or at least high-end scarcity. So go on, Armando.
Yeah, if I see that there's a quarterback run, I'm not going to panic unless it's a necessary position in my league. I do play 2 quarterback leagues. One of my home leagues is a 2 quarterback league, and quarterbacks go pretty fast. But I don't panic. I just load up on running backs. I load up on receivers because these are the players that, when injuries occur, when bye weeks come into play, these are the players that are harder to replace with consistent production. You can get pretty much, last season I got Jared Goff off the waivers, and he led me to a fantasy championship in my home league. You can still find that kind of production in the waivers from a quarterback, whereas consistent production from the running back position or from the wide receiver position is very difficult, especially when you get into deeper leagues. So I don't panic whatsoever. And yes, I do adjust. I do make adjustments during my draft. I don't, stick to my board at all times. Some of my fault to me that I didn't expect. So I think making adjustments throughout the draft is very important. But panicky is not something I tend to do.
All right, Armando, we're down to about a little less than 15 minutes left. So I want you to get into some in-season management. So go ahead and jump into that, and then we'll see if we get some more questions in.
Absolutely. And, the first thing I'm going to lead off with here is just trust your preseason research. You worked all these months to get those informations and built your lineups and built your rosters. Don't panic after the first 2 weeks of the season where one of the players you drafted high is not working out. It happens that we can start off with a rough schedule. So don't get impatient, wait and give the players enough time to produce. Now, at some point, you're going to have to figure out if this player is, going to pan out or not. And that's a decision you're going to have to make. But, I've seen happen so many times, and I've benefited from it, and I've also been a victim of it where, someone drops someone a week too early. And I pick him up and he ends up being a starter on a week-to-week basis in my roster. Then I've also dropped a player and he's become a starter for someone else. So, don't panic. Don't, overreact to 1 week. In talking about overreacting, don't spend all your salary on the waivers because of 1 week production. Just understand why production is happening. I like to, like I said, I like to stream defenses and kickers. So I pretty much every week I'm adding and dropping kickers unless my defense has a couple good matchups. I go ahead and stick with them. I'm not looking, for my defense to save me and win me the game. I just don't want my defense to, lose a week for me. So that's what I do. I like to stream. I think it's very important to not focus on during your draft on these 2 positions, but rather just go ahead and, stream them. For kickers, I look for indoor kickers, kickers kicking in good weather. I think that's very important. I take Vegas odds into consideration. So if there's a team that has a high total, potentially going to score a lot of points, I'm going to go ahead and maybe pick up that kicker and just take a shot on him. Plan for your bye weeks. During draft, I don't pay attention to bye weeks. That's not something I focus on, but I do plan throughout the week once they're starting, and I look at the next couple of weeks, who's going to be on bye, who I might need to pick up, who's on the waiver. So things like that, prepare for bye weeks. I like to plan and add depth, for the playoff run. If I am a contender, if I'm going to be in the playoff race, I personally like to, just get rid of guys I'm not going to use. I know I'm not going to use guys that are not going to be have an impact and not leave waste space on my bench. If someone's injured, they're not going to play. I'm going to cut ties with them and get someone who can be productive if I needed him on a week, where I'm playing in a playoff game and someone is, out, hurt, bye week, whatever the case may be. And just don't be afraid to make trades. I think that's something that we see in a lot of fantasy leagues. People are afraid to, get ripped off. People are afraid to make a bad trade or make a trade that's going to just if a trade is going to help your team, if you look at it and you're getting a couple of pieces that are really going to help your team, don't be afraid to, trade the best player in the trade. I typically don't like to do that, but if I'm getting a ton of value players where they're going to add, fantasy points to my week to week, roster, then I'm going to go ahead and let go of that superstar. I've had to do that in the past. I've been, I don't like to do it, but it's something that I go ahead and I'm willing to do because you got to focus on winning. I like winning now this season. I can't predict what's going to happen next year. I'm not going to hang on to a player because he can be a superstar next year. No, I'm going to try to win this year, and that's the way I look at every season. I try to win this year.
I just got to jump in and say, we'll get some questions here. But that late, Jen mentioned it as well in the chat, Jen Ryan, looking for guys with late buys, right? Good players, but guys with late buys. I think that's something I like. So I don't have to mess with it, right? At the onesie position, kickers, defense. Look, I want a good defense, but if that good defense has a late buy, I'm very happy because I'm very busy and waiver wire is tough for me. Stuart Marshall is asking a lot about, stacking in season long. And I guess, I just want to stress, in DFS, yes, week to week matchups, it's a big deal. In season long, you're opening yourself to some risk. And I agree. Like maybe you think the Jaguars are going to be great, Stuart, and I understand that. And, Leonard Fournette certainly is. But you wonder if their passing attack is going to be enough to have consistently big weeks to put you over the top. I'd be wanting to diversify. In general, Armando, how much are you looking to pair up players on the same offense in season long?
I don't feel comfortable doing it with a wide receiver and a running back. We talked about minimizing risk during the draft strategy, and I like to minimize risk. And like you mentioned, you're going to be in for some rough weeks if you do pair up two players and they have a bad week. You're going to put yourself in a tough spot. I don't mind doing it with a quarterback and a wide receiver. I don't go out of my way to do it. If it happens, I'm okay with it. But it has to be, a quarterback, like Aaron Rodgers and him and Jordy Nelson in their prime. Like a situation like that, or Drew Brees and his number one wide receiver during their primes. But taking, that kind of risk, it's not really necessary unless it just, it falls that way for you. But I don't like to do it. I don't go out of my way to do it.
And just to, I'm not like try to, badmouth the Jaguars because, we know Blake Bortles maybe not – doesn't seem like the best quarterback, and they want to run the ball first. But if you look at his finishes, what has it been? Top 5, top 10, and then 13 last year. So he's certainly capable, but it's kind of spikes. It tends to go up and down the general production. A couple other questions, Armando, that I got in here, and these are maybe kind of general questions. One that I answered, but I would like to get your take. Which teams do you think have the biggest scheme change from this season to last season? I went with Chicago and Tennessee. I think going from kind of more conservative offenses to maybe more modern approaches seems like a good thing for me. Anybody else jump out at you?
I think Detroit's going to play a different type of game than we're used to seeing, with their new head coach. I agree with you, Tennessee, I think, and Chicago are two good ones. But I think Detroit is going to, be a little bit different than we've seen. They added some running backs. I think they're going to try to run the ball a little bit more than we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I want to get to this with Casey too if we get a chance. But what about Joe Mixon? I look at that Bengals offense. They've kind of retooled the offense. Bill Lazor gets the play. He gets to make his own offense. There's a lot of changes, including terminology. But to me, the changes on the offensive line. If Cordy Glenn stays healthy, Billy Payne comes in, the first-round draft pick at center. I think offensive lines are a big deal. Again, we're going to get in with this with Casey Joyner. But your thoughts on Mixon coming into this year?
I like him quite a bit. I think there's a lot of potential there. We expected big things from him last season, but Jeremy Hill was still in the picture. He's no longer there, and I think that makes a big difference. I still think Gio Bernard is going to take some touches away from Mixon, but I think it's going to be more in the passing downs. And if they fall behind, And this is a defense that, in the Bengals, I'm not excited about this team by any means, but this is a defense that has always held their own and typically stays in close games for the most part, at least in recent years. So I do think Mixon's potentially in for a nice season. I do like where he's going, and there's a lot of depth at this position. And he's one of those running backs where you can get, you're not exhausting a first round pick or a second round pick, but you're still getting an every down back. In a back that you're getting in the third round. So I do have high expectations for him this season.
Yeah, I'm with you there. A lot of talk about kickers in the chat. That makes me very nervous. Jake Seeley would be having a conniption fit. A couple things about, we talk about the preseason research. What are the key things? I mean, you talk about the personnel changes. You talk about the coaching changes. When you see the coaching changes, we had the question about that. Are we looking for, like, I look at Mike McCoy going to Arizona, and I want to stick with Arizona, but that's where I started. And, we know Bruce Arians, not a big fan. His tight end was a tackle. Now they have Ricky Seals-Jones. I mean, are you looking at some of the histories of these new assistants coming in, or maybe the ones that even stayed? You mentioned Detroit. I mean, Jim Bob Cooter stays there, his comfort level with Matt Stafford. We know they want to run more, but how much is that? To me, that's the key thing. How much do you use? How much does that weigh on your decision making?
Well, what I do is I look at the type of coaches coming in, and also you have to look at his personnel. Is his strength of coaching and what he likes to do? Does he have the personnel to do it, or are they 1 year away? We've seen it in past where a coach that likes to run an offense that's highly potent in the passing game, but they just don't have the tools. They don't have the resources to be efficient and be effective. So maybe that transition isn't taking place right away. So maybe it's a year or two. So that's it really depends on the type of coach and then the personnel NFL team has to put it into perspective. One guy, Eli Manning, I think this is a situation where the personnel has changed. New running back there. I think a bounce back season is very possible simply because you can't just look at last season. There was a lot of different moving parts that occurred last year, which caused his failure. And this season, there's a ton of positives, a ton of, things that are pointing in the right direction for him to bounce back. Not saying he's going to be great by any means, but, just to put things into perspective, you can't just go by one season. You got to, look at all the changes and how they're going to affect that, a player or a team.
I do think your take on kickers is correct. The players with a dome, players playing a dome, or like look at in particular NFC South kickers where they play in multiple domes, right? If you're in Atlanta, New Orleans, places where they have multiple domes. Anyhow, Armando, great way to start the summit tonight. We're going to bring you back on in just a little bit to talk more DFS. But we're going to get ready to go to Casey Joyner momentarily. So we'll set that up. I just want to reset the plate here. That was Armando Marsal from Football Diehards, of course. Casey Joyner from ESPN.com is up next, followed by Bobby Gomez, a DraftKings Millionaire Maker winner. Armando will be back after that. Jen Ryan, who you will find in the chat right now from Football Diehards, trolling us all about defenses and kickers and things like that. It's always a joyous thing. And then we'll close out the night with Jeff Mans. And Jen's going to talk gambling and DFS, so that's a good thing. But first, I want to get to my man, Casey Joyner. You know him from ESPN. You should know him as the fantasy scientist. Put out your draft guide is out, Casey. The Football Scientist 2018 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Go ahead and tell everyone what you got going there before we dig into the meat and taters.
Oh, that's the joyous part of the year is getting that draft guide out the door. It's 483 pages, more than 100,000 words. It's hard to summarize in a hurry what the draft guide has, but it has player grades. You're talking PPR, non-PPR auction. It has color-coded metrics, so you can look at a player from last season and know if they've got good metrics. You're going to see a bunch of green ratings on their metric charts. You've got yellow-rated metric chart, okay, red or bad. They're rated in the same way, so you can look at players and know right on a glance, is this player a blue-rated player, an elite player, a green-rated player, a good starter, a yellow-rated player, a quality starter, or a quality backup, or a red-rated player? All the color codings, you've got matchup ratings. We're talking matchup ratings for all the individual players. We're talking pass blocking matchups. We're talking pass rushing matchups. We're talking individual cornerback matchups. I mean, it's 483 pages of metric goodness.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now, by the way, and enjoying it immensely. And I guess, let's get started in this because, I mean, there's already been some questions about some of the things. You have one of the things we're going to talk about here is the high ceiling, high floor players. You have an article coming on ESPN talking about that. Why don't you throw out some of that? Let's start with Derrick Henry as a guy who maybe has a strong floor and a high ceiling.
Yeah, I look at high floor, high ceiling players, and the criteria there is, a Le'Veon Bell or an Antonio Brown, they're high ceiling players. We already know they have high floor players, but they're going to cost you so much, you can never get them at a value price. So for a high floor, high ceiling player, for a player to fit into that category, they actually have to be, say, an RB2 who is going to give you RB2 value, unless, barring an injury or some really egregious situations, he's giving you RB2 value, but he's got RB1 upside. Nobody fits that description better, in my opinion, than Derrick Henry, because Henry is playing for a team that is probably going to give him the lead carries. I don't care what they say about Deion Lewis. I know he's productive. He's their pass-catching back. If Lewis gets hurt, there's no way that Henry can match what he does. But if Henry gets hurt, they can have Lewis be a guy who can carry more, so he's the more irreplaceable player. Plus, you got to remember, Derrick Henry in 2015, he led college football in carries by a 57 attempt total. He was first, Christian McCaffrey second, but McCaffrey's 57 carries behind. So we know he can carry the load. Plus, Deion Lewis is 5'7", 5'8", 180 pounds. You're not giving him 250 carries. So he's going to get a ton of carries. The Titans' offensive line last year ranked 11th in a metric I have called good blocking rate. Measure so often an offense gives its ball carries quality run blocking. It's really important because quality run blocking carries are 4 to 5 times more productive from a fantasy perspective than carries that don't get quality blocking, carries that I call bad blocking plays. So they ranked 11th last year in that category. They were first in that category in 2016 or 2015. They can be that level again if Jack Conklin comes back from his ACL. If he gets back and comes back, they can be back into the top 10 and probably in the upper 5 of the league. And Derrick Henry last year averaged 8.9 yards per carry. When he got good blocking, it's good blocking yards per attempt, another metric I have that's widely covered in the draft guide. That's a very good number. If you can get double-digit carries, if you can get double-digit total in that category, you're doing really well. 8.9 is on the precipice of being in the elites. I think he could get to that level if they put him out there more often. So when you start adding those together and all the elements that they have and where he's falling right now in ADPs, I think he's an RB2 who's fantastic value there and can easily give you RB1 upside.
Right, and I guess, to me, the big thing this year is offensive lines matter. I mean, I think that's the thing we've learned in fantasy in recent years, and that's something that I really appreciate about what you do is you really quantify, rank the offensive line, the quality of run blocking. Talk about some teams we can expect to have really superior run blocking this year as examples, and maybe some on the other end of the spectrum for us.
I'll cover one team you were talking about in the last segment. You mentioned that you were looking at Joe Mixon.
Right.
And you were looking at if Joe Mixon was going to be a guy who you could count on for quality run blocking. I'm going to tab here for a second and look here. Last year, Cincinnati had a 43.5% good blocking rate. They gave the ball carriers quality run blocking 43.5% of the time. In my my metric grades, it's like a top 10 ranking, or it's right on the border of top 10. It's what I call a green rated ranking, though, which means it's a good number. So you can look at a glance and tell that's a number that you want. That's a good number there. So they have that type of run blocking. Last year, though, he averaged 6.6 yards per attempt when he got good blocking, which is a red rated number. It's a bad number. He's capable of much better than that. And when you're talking about what the Bengals are going to be able to do with their offense, as you mentioned that last year they made the change in offensive coordinators early in the season and really never got everything back into full swing. I think they're going to be able to combine those two and say, we're going to give our ball carriers quality run blocking. Mixon's going to be able to take more advantage of his upside, and that's going to be a big plus for them.
When we look at, a lot of talk about Jacksonville right now, we know what Leonard Fournette is. We know what their plan is. We know what they want to do. And they maybe foreshadowed that even further with some of their moves on the offensive line, correct?
They did. An interesting thing about Jacksonville, though, this is a little curveball here. I have a thing called matchup points. It measures how strong a team's matchups are. And I measure it on it's a 0 to 100 scale during a week-to-week basis over the course of for like a full season. It ends up being more like 50 to 90. Jacksonville has a passing matchup points total. Higher is better. 100 is great. 0 will be terrible. They have a matchup points and passing of 96 points. It's one of the strongest matchup points totals in the league. And their run matchup points is 72, which is a mid-tier, close to lower tier. They've got much more favorable passing matchups than they do rushing matchups. And their blocking last year, 36.4% good blocking rate. It's not a good number. It's in between a yellow and red. It's kind of an orange rated metric. It's not good. They're capable of better, but I wonder, because by the end of the year, it seemed that they trust Bortles more, and they had him throw, if you count pass penalty plays, he threw 545 times, which is actually a green rated number. I mean, it's one of the higher numbers. I have a feeling they're going to lean on Bortles more this year than they have in past years, and I don't think he's going to get the 600 attempts, but I think he's going to get a lot of attempts, and they'll still lean heavily on Fournette. But again, I think when you're talking about a run offense that's not blocking as well as people think, matchups that are a little bit tougher, and a very favorable set of passing matchups, I have a feeling that Jacksonville is going to try and diversify a bit this year.
And Stuart Marshall is out there smiling and nodding at what you're saying. I hope you like that, Stuart. So we got the top 5 best O-line blocking question for reader. How much do we factor in when those top rated offensive lines are going against top rated defensive fronts?
I'm looking, if you're talking matchups when it comes to offensive lines, that's a big factor, because it's something that if you've got a really good run blocking offense, it's this sort of situation where you don't sit Le'Veon Bell no matter what the matchup is. You're not going to sit Antonio Brown no matter what the matchup is. So if you've got a really good running back, you're not going to get away from that. But I'm looking at grades for next year. I'm looking at Tennessee in the top 5. I'm looking at, and these are preliminary grades. They may change. I'm going to be putting out an article on ESPN in mid-August. They'll update these grades to reflect some injuries, because we're starting to see a couple injuries right now in early camps and such. But I've got Tennessee in the top 5. I've got New Orleans in the top 5. I've got the Rams in the top 5. I've got Atlanta rated first, believe it or not.
I believe it. I've heard this discussion. Yeah. I've had this discussion, and it's fascinating.
New England
changed my thoughts on Devonta Freeman a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely. And Freeman's is going. And by the other play in the top 5 would be New England, and I don't think their offensive line sometimes gets the due that it deserves for being as good as it is. If you're talking Devonta Freeman, I'm talking here that he had last year. Freeman, he only averaged 7.8 yards per attempt, but he got good blocking. That's not a good number. It's in the middle of the line. He's not a double-digit yards per attempt kind of guy. He's never going to get you probably up to 10, but he's been in the 8s and the 9s before, and they gave him good blocking 44.9% of the time. Bad thing for Atlanta, though, we mentioned tough run matchups, 63 run defense matchup points. It's one of the lowest totals in the league, and it's going to make it difficult for them. Again, I think you can still – you don't have to get good run blocking 45% of the time to be a quality running back. Matt Forte used to post really good fantasy totals, and he'd get 33, 35% good blocking rate. He just make the most of his opportunities. But it does help if you have 2 running backs, you'd rather have the running back of 45% than 35%. You'd rather have the one that's going to have quality run blocking. So I still like Freeman, but I think with those matchups, Atlanta might try and lean more on the passing game.
We're going to talk about some more about pass blocking, but to set that up, are good run blocking teams also generally good pass blocking teams? Is that something that maybe isn't necessarily so?
Most of the time they are. Like, I'm looking at, again, preliminary grades. These could change by the time my article comes out. New England right now ranks as an A- in pass blocking and a B+ in run blocking. So if you're talking like the top teams, but Tennessee's got a B and a B+. You're talking the Rams will have a B+ and an A. In order to get up there, you pretty much have to be good, but it's very rare. The Falcons are the only team that gets A's in both categories. Actually, there's going to be there's 3 categories. It's pass blocking, run blocking, and there's no metric I look at that I call stability and consistency. I want to see personnel consistency, because offensive lines, it's very important for them to stay together as a group, and I want stability. I don't want a team that does really well in one metric and does a terrible job in another, and they do a bad job in another, and you measure them out, and it's okay, they rank pretty well, but they do something badly. I give points to a team that's going to be consistently good across the board, because consistency is a huge factor.
Right, and that kind of brings us to a subject you have. We want to talk about upside, downside versus overall rankings. Run us through that kind of theory that you have.
A few years ago, I ran into a problem in one of my draft guides. I had Carson Palmer ranked really low, but I looked at his metrics over the year, and I found that, boy, he throws a lot of vertical passes, and he's in the Bruce Arians offense, and I thought if things go well for him, he could be a QB1, probably low-tier QB1, but he could be. But at the time, I had a static ranking system, so it was like you just had to pick, and I said, fine, whatever, I think he's 19, 21, something like that. He was low-tier 2, upper-tier 3, because if you looked at his downside factors, you'd say that's where he probably belongs. And then when he had, I think he ranked 5th in quarterback points that year, I kicked myself like, I've got to find a way to address this because that static ranking system is just not working well enough for me. I need to be able to find a way to express to readers that this guy might have a ceiling you need to be aware of. So maybe you should think of him, even if you're going to draft him as a 2, that he's going to give you that upside. So I came up with a system I call the overall upside and downside system, and it gives you rankings where it says, here's your overall grade, where if you're trying to play the percentages, this is where the percentages are. If you're trying to play for upside, here's where he's probably going to rank if things go well for him from an upside perspective. And from a downside perspective, same thing. If things go badly for this player, here's where his downside would be. And it gives you more of a spectrum on players to say, okay, this person, maybe I do want to take him as a wide receiver 4 because I think he's got 2 upside. You might want to play for the upside there, but a lot of the time you might say, I want a 3 as a 3, a 4 as a 4. I don't want to have holes in my lineup because somebody had some downside.
Right, and that makes perfect sense. So let's go back into the pass blocking and kind of explain how that impacts quarterbacks without causing problems for the wide receivers and tight ends. I'm wondering how you're going to thread this needle. I'm waiting with bated breath. Go.
It's pretty simple. I did a couple months study this offseason, and I looked at pass rushing and pass blocking and said, okay, where are the impactful plays? Where's the meat in this? Where's the value here? And again, I would find that in order for a pass rush to be impactful, it's got to do something to physically impact the quarterback. You got to sack him. You've got to knock the ball down. You've got to tip the ball. You've got to hit him while he's passing. You've got to rush him out of the pocket so he throws the ball. You've got to do something to where he's doing something with the ball that's really low percentage. It's going to lose yards of it, the sack, or if it's one of those other plays, he's going to be getting 0 yards. If you're just getting pressures, it's going to lower the value of some of the passes, but not by enough, especially the more vertical the passes are. The value of pass rushing actually starts to decline. You'd think it'd be higher, but if the quarterback can get the ball way downfield, generally speaking, he's going to be nearly as productive as he is, even if you don't get a pass rush in his face. And the number of interceptions that the defense gets because of the pass rush, it does rise, not by enough to where you'd say, oh, that's a big difference. It does increase, but not by that much. So wide receivers and tight ends, as long as the quarterback is getting his passes away, there's not going to be a decrease in value, even if there's a pass rush. But for quarterbacks, you can see a lot because a quarterback can be impacted by a pass rush, say on 10, 15, 20 plays in the game if it's a really, really tough pass rush. And that can impact receivers just in the sense of if it's that heavy of a pass rush, you're going to see the number of opportunities drop. But as long as the quarterback's getting away 30, 35 passes, 30 passes in the game, it's really the pass rush is going to impact his ability to score more than it is the other players.
For example, the Jaguars against the Texans early last year comes to mind.
Yes.
While we're talking about that, Texans offensive line, still a concern. Everyone's really keen on Deshaun Watson. I mean, if you want him, you are paying premium prices for him. How do you feel about that going into your fantasy league? Are you clapping secretly when somebody drafts Deshaun Watson way high? And knowing are you a high quarterback drafter? Or do you wait?
I tend to be. I've got players I talked about where it's blue rated, green rated, yellow, and then red. Blue is elite players. We're talking Le'Veon Bells, Antonio Browns, those players. They're real difference makers. Green rated players are starting caliber players, and it could be upper tier starters, lower tier starters, but they're starting level players, not at the elite level, but the guys you want in your lineup. Yellow rated players are good bench players. That's who you want to fill your bench up with. And red rated players, unless they're in situations where they're a handcuff to a player you have as a starter, you really don't want them on your bench on your team at all. I will go early for a blue rated quarterback. There's only a couple of them, only 3. I think 4 this year. I will go for who have one part of their grade at least lands in the blue category. I'll draft one of those guys possibly early because they've got that blue rated upside. If they go off the board, I'm playing value from then on out. And when it comes to Watson, though, he runs the ball so exceptionally well. And he's a guy who throws the ball vertical no matter what. He had the worst bad decision rate in the league last year. Bad decision rate is a metric I had that measures how often the quarterback makes a mental error that leads to a turnover opportunity for the other team. So he's taken more chances, throwing more risky passes than anybody else. But he's got Hopkins. And by the way, Will Fuller, that's a guy you want to keep an eye on because he had some really good metrics in a small sample size. If he can just keep around that level of where he was in metric production-wise, if he can keep around that level and get 100, 120 targets, and you combine him with, say, instead of having Hopkins catch, you have 180 targets getting down to 150. So maybe it increases his per target pay or per target production pace. You combine those two plus with what Watson could do running the ball, then I think Watson could be a blue-rated quarterback. But, yeah, I am worried about the Texans' offensive line. They're ranked 31st right now in the prelim rankings.
That's not good. And, by the way, that Will Fuller, if you weren't taking account, that was touchdown every 7.1 targets last year. I'm not sure that's sustainable. I'm guessing no.
I like his – I'll give you another metric here real quick. What I like is because the touchdowns aren't sustainable, and he probably can't do his per target pace. But actually, his per target pace last year, 13.5 yards per attempt on vertical passes. That's 11 or more yards downfield. And then 16.6 on stretch verticals. Those are good numbers. They're not off the charts numbers. They're both in the green category, but they're not like strong green. They're lighter green ratings. They're really good, but they're not impossible to replicate. That's why I think he can do that on a higher target volume. So even if he doesn't get in the end zone as often, he might be able to get in the end zone close to as often. And then if he's got that kind of production, you double his target pace. Well, then you've got a really valuable player.
Before I move on, you're drafting in a vacuum, and I know nobody does that, but we're going to do that. We were talking about Deshaun Watson, and we're going to continue a little bit. Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz. All things being equal, assuming both are starting week 1, it seems pretty certain Watson will. I think Wentz is heading in that direction. Just looking at the schemes, supporting cast, offensive lines, matchups, all the things.
Yeah, Wentz is the guy. Wentz is absolutely the guy. Wentz is, I've got him ranked on my quarterback boards, 3rd overall, 2nd in upside, 4th in downside. He's a blue-rated quarterback. 91.6 overall grade, 99 upside grade, 89.7 on downside. He just misses the 90 is the cutoff for blue rated. He just misses that. They've got a favorable matchup points total. He rushed. I covered this in an ESPN article about Wentz that's going to be coming out this week. He rushed 64 times last year. ESPN Stats and Information has measured how many times a quarterback has run. Their database goes back to 2001. I believe it was only 7 quarterbacks that rushed 64 times in a year. 57 of them scored a touchdown. Wentz did not score a touchdown last year. He rushes for 64 times or more this year, and he gets in the end zone at a usual pace. He's going to add some points there. Their pass blocking's good. They get a 9-time Pro Bowler back in Jason Peters. Austin Jeffrey was battling the shoulder injury, which is not going to be healthy. Mike Wallace, surprisingly good numbers last year at Baltimore. He's going to be a huge upgrade because he put up good numbers in Baltimore last year on a per-target basis. Imagine what he could do in that offense. You bring Sproles back. You start looking at all these factors. The schedule, like I said, is somewhat favorable. The pass blocking, what he does in all these areas, I keep looking at going, how in the world is this guy? And everybody's on the Watson bandwagon, and I understand why, but Wentz was on pace last year. If he would have not been injured and continued at the same pace, depending on how much credit you want to give for that Rams game that he missed, if you want to either give it a half credit, 3/4 credit, depending how much you want to give him, he either finishes within a point of Russell Wilson for the number 1 overall quarterback spot, number 1 scorer in fantasy football, or he is the number 1 scorer. And yet that doesn't seem to be reflected in the draft rankings this year.
We're talking to Casey Joyner, the football scientist. You know him from ESPN. You know him from the footballscientist.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Casey. What is it? It's at Casey Joyner TFS. I don't want to screw it up.
Yes,
and just let's throw out a couple of, I know you do all kinds of cool metrics. Throw out a couple of the ones that you created specifically for the draft guide for fantasy owners.
The ones this year, one of the big ones I focused on was something I'm calling fortune points. And fortune points are a way to measure, okay, people talk about drops and people talk about inaccurate passes, and they look at, say, okay, this player had 6 drops this time there. I'll look at that and say that's only part of the story because if a player drops passes, he's going to lose some value there. But players also benefit a lot from blown coverages or defensive mistakes. The defender falls down. The offense does something. The safety goes completely out of position. Not where the safety does what he's supposed to do, but the safety makes a mistake, bites up on a play action fake, does something, gets turned around, whatever it is. So in this draft guide, I do offensive fortune points and defensive fortune points, and I look at how much did you get hurt by plays where the quarterback overthrew you, you dropped the ball, something of that nature, and from a fantasy point perspective, and how much did you get helped by defensive coverages, and then I net those out. So you can get an idea of players who are doing very well or very poorly in these metrics, and whether or not I say fortune in it because I mean it in the sense of they might have been lucky or unlucky this year, and if their luck turns back to normal, regression to the mean, then that could be a big factor for them. I'll give you one example. O.J. Howard last year, you're not going to believe this. On defensive errors, he gained 44.5 points of his production on defensive errors. It's like an insane amount of points that he gained. I think it's like half his production, where the defense screwed up and did something, but then the play action let them uncover something. That's not going to happen again, more than likely. And if it doesn't happen again, that's a place where he might lose 20 points just off of luck, and then he's going to have to make up for that somewhere else, and I don't think he'll do that.
Interesting. We have a question from Kenny. He's in a 12-team league, 0.5 PPR, and he'd like to know if he goes running back in the first 2 rounds, and I think this is a good question to take out wider, which wide receiver should he target during rounds 3 to 6 of a PPR draft?
If I'm thinking 3 to 6, I'm looking at that would be you're talking people. I like to go with upside plays too. So trying to think of where that would rank in overall. I'm looking at guys. I'm looking at my 3rd tier players. I guess I'm looking at wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 4s, things of that nature. I'm going to look at guys like a Brandon Cooks is at the top of my wide receiver 3 chart. And I'm looking at PPR leagues. Maybe I don't know if he meant PPR or non-PPR, honestly. But
He's at 0.5.
He said 0.5. Thank you. Okay. So I got Brandon Cooks rated up there. I think that he's going to do that a lot for the vertical game in that offense. I've got Jarvis Landry rated high. I got Diggs rated at 22 on my PPR board. I've got 23 on the PPR board. I've got Corey Davis. Actually, I've got Hogan rated 20th on the board. I got Corey Davis rated 24th. Horrible metrics last year, but I think what he did in the playoffs is going to be a precursor for what he does this year. Gordon ranked 25th. That number could change depending on what happens.
Right.
Yep. Allen Robinson's next. I got Julian Edelman after that. I got Fuller after that. And then I've got Randall Cobb ranked at the bottom of the 28, at the bottom of that level.
Wow.
Kenny Stills. Yeah, I think Cobb will.
Right. A lot of people looking. I mean, there's opportunity. It's another guy where we're thinking all of a sudden there's some opportunity there. I want to turn that around on you, though. What if you go wide receiver in those first 2 rounds? Who are the running backs I'm looking at? Or who are some running backs maybe that are a little off the radar? Like Alex Collins is a guy I have a lot of that's available maybe 3rd or 4th round. But even beyond that, some of the guys maybe solid starters. You know, I have some Marshawn Lynch, I'm going to confess, and some Isaiah Crowell, just based on anticipated opportunities. What should my expectations be for those later round starting running backs I'm drafting?
Again, Mitch, going with the green, yellow, and red, or blue, green, yellow, red ranking system. The green rated running backs, it stops as far as their overall grades, the overall rankings. It stops at Ajayi at 16 in the PPR league is where it ends. He's the last one. Everybody else below him, as far as their overall grade, ranks is yellow or below. But I can look at an Ingram. I think Ingram's vastly overvalued in some leagues. We just had I just was in a mock draft yesterday, and he fell. I honestly had already had my running back, so I wasn't looking at running backs. I was concentrated on positions. And he fell like the 8th round or something. It was incredible. Like, my gosh, he's only going to miss a few games, and he's going to come back, and they're going to want to after the early part of the season. So I have him rated high. I have Freeman rated at that point. I got Deion Lewis in the PPR league. I still think he's going to get enough production in the passing game. He's going to get 75, 100 targets. He's still going to carry the ball 100 times. They're not going to make Henry the bell cow. So I think that Lewis is still going to do well. I like Penny a lot. I've got Burkhead rated at 21 in PPR leagues, and then I've got Geis also. I'd be higher on Geis. Washington has the toughest run defense schedule in the league.
Hey, I hate that. Just before we'll get to some questions here momentarily, I know you have an ESPN article up right now. Getting back to the quarterbacks, quarterback 2s who are going to deliver quarterback 1 value. You want to give us a taste of that?
Yes, definitely. And it starts with there's I believe 4 quarterbacks in that article. Alex Smith is one of the top players there. Great pass blocking, better pass blocking than people think. People didn't think that he could do great on vertical passing. He did tremendous on vertical passing back when he was in San Francisco. And when Kansas City said, we got Mahomes, we might be taking your job, it motivated him. And mind you, again, Tyreek Hill, I get it. And there's a lot of he gained, Smith gained 27.1 points in defensive errors on stretch vertical passes. So there's a lot to be said for the defensive errors causing some of the problems. But still, I measure the metrics on a red, yellow, green basis, and they're on a gradient, so you can be light green, normal green, or strong green. Alex Smith is strong green both in vertical and stretch vertical. 14.7 yards per attempt of vertical passes last year, 21.9 on stretch vertical, 16 vertical touchdown passes is strong green, stretch vertical, 12 touchdown passes, strong green. And the last 2 years, Washington ranked second in the league in vertical touchdown passes. So this is a vertical offense. They're going to ask him to throw the ball. He only threw the ball 516 times last year and posted these numbers. I think he probably takes a step back, but I think he's still a QB1 or maybe at the lower tier of that.
Interesting. The reporting today, too, that Jamison Crowder's getting very busy. Jay Gruden's comments this week about maybe Josh Doxson isn't going to have the big overall numbers, but he's going to be a huge factor in the red zone. He's a 50-50 guy. If we see Smith go down the field some like he did early last year when he was challenged by your Patrick Mahomes, maybe we get a little something out of him. A question from one of the people out in the audience, and I guess it's a keeper question, but I just kind of like to focus on the situations. This guy is choosing. He has Dalvin Cook already, but he wants to keep either Jordan Howard or Kenyon Drake. He's thinking Drake. I see the upside. Did you see enough last year to buy into that? And look, we know what the matter with Jordan Howard is. He doesn't catch well, it turns out.
Yeah.
And this offense looks like it maybe is going to throw the ball. I would also say, though, this offense looks like it's going to threaten opponents more. Less 8 men in the box. Kind of weigh those two out a little bit.
Well, Kenyon Drake averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, and he got good blocking last year, one of the higher totals in the league, near that double-digit mark. Again, if you're double-digit in good blocking yards per attempt, I mean, it's rare air. People don't usually do it 2 years in a row, but 9.5, he's doing really well. He even got 2.2 yards per attempt on bad blocking plays, which is not much, but it's a lot better than the league average. Problem is the Dolphins only gave him good blocking 36.8% of the time. I don't trust the Dolphins offense as a whole. I think their line is probably going to be a little bit worse than it was last year. And I love Chicago's upside, how aggressive the offense is going to be. And when I'm looking at their run blocking was 40.6% good blocking rate last year. Not the greatest number, but it's a solid number. I think that their offensive line has more talent than that, so they're going to do better. They also have 81 matchup points. That's a green rated matchup total, so I think he's going to be he's going to have a lot of opportunities there. And he also averaged 8.5 yards per attempt when he got good blocking, which is another quality number. So he's not at the same level. He maybe doesn't have breakaway speed of Drake, but I like his offensive situation better. And again, Miami brought in Gore. Why are you bringing in Gore if you think Drake can carry the load? Why would you bother bringing in somebody else like that who could maybe try and take the workload? So I like Howard better.
That's the way I lead as well. Now we're going to go with the obvious, or we are kind of getting down on time a little bit. And again, in case you didn't know, Casey Joyner is a scientist, a football scientist. You can check him out at
quotes and everything too. See, yeah.
Right. So, yes, and matchups do matter. We know that too. But let's do the obvious because we have a question from the audience. How do you rank Le'Veon, Elliott, and Gurley? Give us the top three. Break them down.
Yeah, Le'Veon. If we're looking at, I've got a top 258 in my draft guide and a top 258 PPR, non-PPR. If you want me to stick to running back, I could do that too. If I'm looking at running back, in fact, I'll cover them both if you don't mind.
Please.
From running back situation, I've got Bell first, Johnson second, Gurley third. I'll give you Hunt fourth, and Barkley fifth. That's non-PPR. And the reason, and the first four are blue rated. Barkley's not blue rated because I don't trust his breakaway ability. I go over more of that. And if you go to the ESPN fantasy section, you'll see why I think Barkley's got some breakaway issues in our boom, bust, and sleepers section. You'll see that. But with these guys here, I think Bell, when I grade him, he gets blue ratings across the board. I think Johnson, Gurley, and Hunt, they all have a little bit of downside issues to them. I don't think they're going to be – they'll still be blue rated players, I think, but they have some downside issues to them. And I don't think Bell, unless there's the holdout, that changes things. I don't think he'll hold out, though. I think that's how I'd rate them there. I got them rated the same way in non-PPR. But I'm looking at in PPR. I'm looking at in non-PPR scoring, I would go Bell. I actually have Brown rated way up there, too, in non-PPR scoring, where I think that he's going to be that kind of an impact player. Johnson, Gurley, Hunt, and then in a PPR environment, I would go Bell, Brown, Johnson, Hopkins. I still think he's going to have that kind of a season. Then Jones, Julio, and then Todd Gurley.
That's Casey Joyner, ladies and gentlemen, the football scientist. You can find him at thefootballscientist.com, at Casey Joyner, TFS. I put it in the chat. I will put it in again when I get a free minute here. And you can find him on ESPN as well, in the fantasy section of the site, and the Insider, all kinds of great information. I read them there all the time. And you should too. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future, Casey. Thanks so much for the time, man. Really appreciate it. Great session.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
All right, boys and girls. Again, I'm going to go ahead and reset. Great stuff from Casey. Always love talking to him. Have him on my serious show all the time. We're going to, if you missed out, we had Armando Marsal to start. Casey just then. We're going to bring up Bobby Gomez, DFS DraftKings millionaire maker. That's a lot of money. You guys did not realize this. That we call that life-changing money. I don't know if it's the be-all, end-all, but it's pretty damn good. After him, we're going to have Armando Marsal come back and talk some DFS. We're going to have Jen Ryan talk DFS and gambling. And Jeff Mans, more DFS. We're going DFS heavy. Bobby Gomez, sir, how are you?
How's it going? Glad to be on for the summit.
Yeah, glad to have you on. And also great article in this year's Pro Forecast magazine, just kind of laying it out. And I think, that's some of what we're going to talk about here is, some of your approaches, some of your strategies. Everyone wants to win $1 million, right?
No, definitely. It's pretty cool. Honestly, life-changing experience, like you said. Yeah.
Right. And you get on TV 3,000 times a day. That's, how was that?
That was pretty, it was pretty fun. It was at a pretty interesting time in my life. So, it was pretty cool.
Before you get started, let me I'm curious, how long have you been playing DFS? When did you start? How did you get started? And how much have you ramped up since the big win?
So for me, I started playing standard fantasy when I was probably in the 6th grade. I think I was on ESPN.com. I ruined someone's draft. I think I took Kurt Warner in like the first round, and people went crazy. But they were the greatest show on turf at that time. So, and then around 2014, my brother was talking about DraftKings. We had a standard fantasy league that we'd been running for a couple of years. And he was like, "Oh, just hop on. We throw a couple bucks in like 3 weeks." We had that Jonas Gray play, kind of worked out.
Yes.
Cool mill, yeah.
Right. And so all right, I'm going to let you just kind of roll through some of this if you'd like. I think you kind of just want to roll through some of the basics, and we can get more detailed after you set the table there if you'd like. So go ahead and just holler out at me if you need some questions or you need more.
Yeah, definitely. So basically talking about my process, for me, going into the week, I kind of like to get like an overall view of the slate. And when I start, I'll check pricing, and then most importantly, Vegas lines. Vegas lines for me kind of point me in a direction of where to go, kind of gives me a path. So, and when I'm thinking about Vegas lines, I'm thinking about implied totals and favorites. Implied totals for me would be team implied totals, obviously more than just game totals, because team could be favored by 10 points and the line in the total could be 48. And that kind of sets me in a direction. Like teams that are favored by 6 or 7 points, I'm kind of looking for running backs and cash from those teams. And then in tournaments, I'm kind of looking for different situations, kind of like home dogs. Usually you can get low ownership off a home dog or just situations like that. So that's kind of pretty much where I'm going in terms of just trying to get an overview and where to allocate my bankroll that week. I kind of go off Vegas. Still there, Bob?
Yes, Bob is gone right now, and Emil Cadlick is here to talk to you.
All right, how you doing, Emil?
I'm doing well. So, what next do you want to chat about in the topic of DFS?
Yeah, no. So basically, just kind of getting into cash games tournaments for a lot of you out there. Kind of just beginning. Cash is kind of like 50-50s, head-to-heads. Double ups are trying to finish in the top 50% of the pool, and then tournaments are guaranteeing prize pools, and obviously they're tournaments.
So do you like to play the cash games?
Yeah, I'm cash game tournament. It's all kind of based off where I kind of think the slate's going to go. Slates are pretty much dynamic. They're ever changing. So based off Vegas, I kind of get a view of what the week could be and where I should kind of be putting my bankroll that week. So that's kind of
you'll put some big money into cash games.
Yeah, I'll play a good sum of money in cash, and I'll play a good sum of money in tournaments. Usually you're supposed to play, a lot of people say starting out like 90% of your bankroll in cash and then 10% in tournaments. But I think it fluctuates from week to week because, like I said, slates themselves are dynamic. So you get into a situation where you kind of want to put yourself in be able to make the best roster construction to fit what you think can kind of bring in the big bucks, I would say, or just a steady week, grind it out in cash.
Can I ask you a little bit of, something that I'm not great at, bankroll management? Look, I'm a GPP player mostly, but I mean, I think, when you're talking cash games, that's how you build that bankroll so you can start, you can start jumping into millionaire makers without dipping into your pocket too heavily. Talk a little bit how you manage your bankroll each week, like how much you put into cash games, how much you put into GPPs, and how long you build until you do that. Are you really disciplined now that you're a millionaire, or do you just not give a damn?
I'm pretty disciplined. I think you have to be. The longevity, like if you want to be a good player, you kind of have to be disciplined. At first, I kind of wasn't. You kind of have to learn and take your lumps and stuff like that, and then just figure it out in that sense. But for me, like I said, going off Vegas lines, I'm trying to see like Vegas lines and pricing, if I'm trying to find that keystone running back for cash, I quantify cash, like basically I'm looking at usage for me is obviously the name of the game in DFS and pretty much fantasy football, and usage is quantified by touches and snap percentage. So from that standpoint, like if I'm in cash, I'm trying to get the best running back that I figure will be kind of get me over the hump in cash week to week, and who I think is going to have the most usage that week.
And that's the critical aspect to you when you're building your cash. And let's step back a little bit here. There are two kinds of cash games, right?
Yeah, so there's double ups, 50-50s, and then there's head-to-heads. So
talk a little bit about those and what the difference is and what you prefer.
So double ups I'd rather play if you're just starting off. Low-end double ups is probably where you want to go, like 1 to 10 people, just so you kind of avoid like the big guys, and then basically you make your risk a little bit. You kind of, with your risk, you kind of spread it out. So it's not much of, you're not putting as much risk as you would if you're entering like a $5, $5 multi-entry 50-50.
Right. So, in the head-to-head, you're playing a group. And let's say, I think both the majors, you're playing with guys at your level, right? You're not, they don't throw you in with the sharks necessarily.
No, not when you're first starting out. You can kind of avoid the sharks. You can also block better players, but if you go to it's kind of difficult because you can hit sharks at the low dollars. They'll be there, but they don't play as well. They're there, to be perfectly honest. It's just a matter of you kind of get to know who they are, and you can block them if you'd like, depending on the site.
So everyone blocks you, right?
I don't know. I don't think maybe they block some other people, but I might hit some people's block lists.
All right. So you're building a cash lineup game, and what's the basic premise? You're looking for some upside guys, or is this more of a high floor kind of situation? Yeah,
high floor is where to go in cash. That's basically kind of how I try to build my lineups. I base all my cash game lineups off usage and where I think usage is going to go. Because that kind of brings you to the high floor. So,
right. And so when we're doing this, you're looking at the Vegas line, you're looking at the matchups, the Vegas line, you're wanting high floor guys. So you're looking for the high scores, obviously. But it's, there's a safety factor there. You're not want to take risks. So you're looking at the running backs that are getting the heavy workloads. Are you playing many satellite backs in those things if you don't have to?
So it's all dependent on pricing and back to usage again. Like a guy I was looking at week 1, I think Rex Burkhead's at like 4,200. That's like below a backup running back's price, and the game script kind of can't go away from Rex Burkhead. I don't really think they'll rely on a rookie running back week 1, the Patriots, and Rex kind of eliminates tells, which is a good situation for the coaching staff there. I would imagine when they had Blount previously, when he was in the game, you figured they're just pounding the football. Well, with Rex, he's one of the better set of hands in the NFL for a running back. So you can have him in at 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 15, and late in the game, you can swing a pass out to him where people might think you're about to run. So he eliminates that tell aspect. So for him, he's I would say he's probably a pretty good play week 1.
So you're out studying, you're looking at each week at snap counts, targets, etc. Are you watching for trends week to week and following that as well?
Yeah, no, I think you have to be on top of that stuff just because, like I said, usage, snap percentage, where you think people like how you figure the game script's going to go, I think is very important. And that's kind of what gets into like reading Vegas lines. And that's where Vegas kind of points you in the best direction, I would say.
All right. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth, but let's talk about GPPs, tour, grand prize pools. Differentiation is a big deal there. How do you accomplish that? First, explain what it is, and then kind of explain how you accomplish that.
So I think a lot of people think that you're not supposed to play chalk in GPPs, and I think that's totally false. If you look at the majority of the millionaire makers, like people play a good amount of chalk within those lineups, and then there's a couple pivots in certain directions. And I think that the way you can what you're trying to do is figure out what's the good chalk and what's the bad chalk, and trying to leverage the bad chalk in a different direction. And usually when I look at lines and stuff like that, like say the Giants week 1, I think they're a home dog to Jacksonville now, that situation, they're probably going to be pretty low owned just because of recency bias and how people figure Jacksonville will be. Their defense is pretty stout, but Saquon's in a pretty good position because their run defense isn't great. And then Ramsey doesn't fall into the slot, and you're getting OBJ at 7K, I think his price is. So that's a pretty good price tag, especially with Pat Shurmur there. He wants, obviously, an offensive-minded coach. Really kind of ran the wheels off Dalvin Cook early in the season last year. So going back to Saquon, it's probably a pretty good play week 1 in terms of leveraging ownership in a GPP.
That is something I've been talking about ever since they drafted Barkley, is go back and look at Minnesota's the 4 games before Cook got hurt. He was literally running the wheels off, ran the wheel right off him. Damn it, which would hurt my teams a great deal. But I do like that with the Pat Shurmur offense, and I think that is why he's there. So look, I like to play tournaments. There's always going to be some of the lower end guys. What kind of matchups are you looking for? Is it strictly Vegas, or is there some, is it some of it like I try to dig really deep and find a cornerback receiver matchups. Often that's in the slot, right? For me, I find maybe I can have a little luck there. Are there any things you're looking at particularly on those lower end guys to fill those last holes on your roster?
So like I said with Burkhead, I'm looking at guys where the game script won't go away from them, especially with running backs. With receivers, quarterback matchups are something you got to kind of pay attention to. It's not the be-all, end-all. I'm still more worried about the usage that they're going to get, especially if they're going to be low-owned and they're in a high-scoring and the team has a high implied total. Like I'm going to look at rostering them in some aspect.
Vegas knows what the hell they're doing. We've talked about it a couple times. This is their business. So just percentage. As you're playing these things, how accurate in your estimation are these?
I think they're pretty. Vegas is pretty accurate, man. They don't have those big casinos out there for no reason. So it's obviously a good place to start your homework. Obviously, they make mistakes, and that's kind of where you can counter in GPPs.
Right, and talk a little bit about that. Explain how you would leverage that, okay, so you're looking at advanced, you see a line and you're thinking, wow, that looks like out of whack to me. I want to kind of talk me through that process.
No, yeah, so just going back to that Giants line week 1, I think they're a 4-point dog at home. Home dogs, like if you ever gambled, you never bet against a home dog, right? So in a situation like that, and situations that kind of lead to leverage, that would be a situation that I'd be looking at. And then there's also certain edges like Denver, I think, is at Seattle week 1 now. Recency bias. Everyone thinks Seattle is a great defense. Well, in the millionaire maker, I would say like 10% of the pool is going to think Richard Sherman's still on Seattle, but he's not. And that the Legion of Boom really isn't there. So that's kind of an edge. It's not like something that is like, it's really simple information if you do your homework, but some people overlook it, and that's where you can take advantage.
We're talking to Bobby Gomez, a DraftKings Millionaire Maker winner. That's like winning $1 million, which I have not yet done. Hoping this is my big year. You talk about the team, so you look at the total line, the total points for the game. Do you sometimes see situations where you think that's unbalanced? So you think the point total's right, but the team totals are not.
Can you repeat that again, Bob? I'm sorry. I was actually looking at a question someone posted in the chat. Keenum to Sanders week 1. I'm with you on that, but John Long.
Go ahead and talk a little bit about that. All the questions out there.
5-1, and I think Keenum's at 5-1 and Sanders at 5K, or it might be the other way around. But GPP, that's a pretty interesting stack, I would say.
The prices, week one prices are out on DraftKings, and we'll get into that a little bit in this segment and the next segment as well. But what I guess I was saying, when you look at a high points total in the over/under, right, and you think maybe Vegas has, you're looking at maybe one of the teams that you think is going to score most of the points. Is that something that you try to exploit as well, like the high point total, but it's an obvious mismatch to you?
Yeah, so when I see high point totals and I see a mismatch, I kind of leads me to the direction of the underdog's running back, because I want to know if he catches passes, because that fits the PPR format. And late in the game, he's going to probably catch 1, 2, or just a couple passes in a late drive if they're kind of playing from behind, and he's just involved in the passing game because of that. So that would be one edge in terms of a situation like that. And then in terms of the total, if someone's a high favorite, like you said, going back to cash, like a running back, and that's on the favorite, it's a positive correlation in terms of the fact that they're going to get the ball late,
right?
And you want to roster them in cash and probably tournaments as well.
All right. So the favorites, not just the necessarily who Vegas thinks are going to win the game, but who you think is going to win. I mean, how much do you go with your own gut on these, based on what you see from the Vegas people?
So I've been playing parlay cards since I was like 11 years old. So I read lines pretty well. So I kind of trust my gut in certain situations. So I would say, I go off my own instincts. You got to trust yourself. I think you got to have confidence in pretty much anything that you do. So kind of leads to that sense.
So we talked about the pricing being out for this week one, and you've mentioned a few guys. Just, let's look at cash games. Who are some of the big plays? You mentioned Sanders and Keenum. Who are some of the big plays that you think you're going to be using heavily, and why?
In cash, I'm definitely looking at Alvin Kamara. I think he's at 8,500, I would say, just because Ingram not there and the usage probably being in his direction, and also David Johnson as two of my cornerstone running backs, kind of flipping those two around right now. Same thing with Gronk at the tight end position. I think he's at 6,900.
Odd price for him.
The usage will definitely be there with Edelman not playing in that game. So Brady probably look his way pretty often, I would say. Right.
And so look, we look at some of the teams that traditionally, we think fare well. How are you viewing some of these teams we talked about in the last segment? Some offenses we think are going to be, maybe picking up the pace this year. The Chicago Bears, the Tennessee Titans. We're hoping, right? You look maybe a little skeptical. How do you view those teams, and how do you make those week one investments in terms of knowing who's worth spending, who's not?
So I think the Bears are on the Monday night slate. And who was the other team you had mentioned? Tennessee. So I liked the Tennessee-Miami game. I think Tennessee is a favorite on the road. So Miami's a home dog. I'm kind of looking into that game in terms of Danny Amendola, Dion Lewis, new regime there. I don't know how heavy they're going to be on Derrick Henry. Obviously, Derrick Henry is going to be, if he's a favorite, then he's good to pound the ball late. But Dion Lewis does work between the tackles as well. So he's someone that's pretty interesting there at 4,900. And if the game script goes away, he'll be involved in the passing game, as will Henry. But I just think that they gave Dion Lewis, I think it was $20 million, maybe.
They did.
I don't think it was just to be a scat back. So we'll see. I think they're going to kind of divvy up that workload.
I'm with you as well. And I think, when you look at Lewis, so first of all, we're hopeful because Matt LaFleur associated with the Falcons, and and Kyle Shanahan associated with the Rams, and Sean McVay, two of the hot happening offenses. He goes to Tennessee. They've been using the exotic smash mouth, which wasn't all that exotic, and didn't smash many mouths either. So we're hoping for big things there. I look at Dion Lewis, and I kind of agree with you. Here's a guy that we looked at New England last year, was really effective between the tackles. And maybe he's a guy that you're going to ride a little bit more early on, just taking a chance on him, hoping that comes through, or on your expectation.
Well, it's all based off the pricing. I'll definitely have exposure to Dion Lewis in my GPP lineup builds in terms of where I'm going to be. Still 5-6 weeks away, so I'm not really sure, but he's definitely my player pool.
So I don't know if you're sitting here as we head into the season, we're getting close now. Are you starting to identify sleepers, lower price guys that you think are going to be players you're going to be targeting often? And if so, why are you looking at them and how are you targeting them?
Yeah, but I kind of take it on like a week-to-week basis. I kind of just basically because, like I said previously, slates are dynamic; they're ever changing. So you kind of have to read the slate. It's different from standard where, yeah, you have your list of sleepers. Like there's definitely guys I can pinpoint sleepers and be like, oh, they're going to be in a good spot for the season. But I kind of take it on a week-to-week basis.
A little question here, just a comment from John Laub. Cam Meredith might be a tasty versus Tampa in a high over-under game, right?
Yeah, so I like Teddy Ginn if you're going to go in that direction just because of the GPP upside, being that he's had familiarity with Breeze in the past. Cam Meredith's kind of stepping into a new offense, so I don't know how much exposure I'll have to him week one. Things could obviously change within the preseason, but I'll definitely be keeping an eye on where he's kind of how he's being used in the offense throughout the preseason.
So, in your article, you talked about a particular situation. It was week 3 last year, Dolphins. It was the Jets against the Dolphins.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. I thought that was interesting how you handled that and how you kind of worked through it.
I had a rough week that week in cash. Jay Ajayi was like the chalk play of the week going into the week, and then the line kind of shifted. And when the line shifted, something you should always be cognizant throughout the week is line movement. And Jay Ajayi, the line they were going, I think they were rained out or something week 1. Then they went across country. And then they went across country to San Diego, and then they came back to New York. And I stayed on Jay Ajayi, and I definitely should have got off. And it's a rough week, but it happens.
It was a tough week. So some of the things you talked about in the article too, the field stacking and game stacking. Run us through those.
So, yeah, game stacking is very important, and I think running it back is also very important because the game, especially in the NFL, like it all kind of correlates. Game script kind of correlates. If one team's ahead, the other team's going to pass. Like situationally, I'm very big on stacking, especially in GPPs. You don't have to in cash, but definitely in GPPs, I'm stacking as much as possible. Just thinking about stacks, obviously – I kind of like to find situational stacks. Going back to week 1, I think John Laub has mentioned Case Keenum and Emmanuel Sanders. I kind of like that stack. And I also like running it back with a guy like Ed Dixon versus a Broncos secondary that was pretty suspect versus the tight end. I think Ed Dixon's around 2.8 in that game as well. So just like little stuff like that, it's kind of gets you to – but when we won our Millionaire Maker, I think we stacked Rodgers, Cobb, and Nelson, me and Dave, So
that is so three guys stack. 4? How many? Well, when does the stacking stop?
It's all kind of dependent on the matchups, I would say, right? Reading the cornerbacks, just figuring how you kind of think the situation is going to be for teams, and also leverage is very important, I would say as well.
All right, got a question in. What are some of the mistakes that new DFS players make? And let me get my pencil out.
Not stacking would be one. Yeah, you definitely want to be in the stack game. It's a good place to be. I would definitely recommend stacking, especially in GPPs. Other mistakes, just kind of trying to pick the guy that no one has and going away from chalk that you probably should play. You have to be able to identify good chalk.
Right.
You have to be able to identify bad chalk as well, and that kind of will separate you as a DFS player in the long run if you kind of figure out how to do that.
We're talking to Bobby Gomez, the DraftKings Millionaire Maker from Pass. He's going to be helping us out at Football Die Hard some this year, too. We're looking forward to that. And getting back to the field, being with the field, above the field, kind of explain that.
All right, so if you're using an optimizer or if you're maxing out tournaments, that's kind of getting a little bit deeper, diving a little deeper there. But usually ownership projections, you have a on Thursday, I think a lot of the sites kind of post them and you can kind of get them in that sense. So just like an idea would be that, say, AJ Green's chalk around 40% week 1 versus Indy. Do you want to be with the field at 40%? Do you want to be below the field, which would be like under 40%, obviously, and then, or do you want to be overweight on AJ and have like 80% AJ Green week 1? So that's kind of what it means when you talk overweight, underweight, and with the field.
Amendo Bruce would like to know why he does good in most sports season long and sucks so bad in DFS. I'm guessing it's because he's not working on some of the concepts you're focusing on. One of those things you talk about is contest selection. Maybe that's a problem he's having. Maybe you could help him out with that. Talk a little bit about contest selection.
Extremely important contest selection. Like, I don't think you want to be throwing all your bankroll in the Millionaire Maker if you're just starting out and trying to build one. That's kind of the least optimal way to go. That's probably the woke way to go in a sense. If you want to build a bankroll, I would say play single entries, go 90% cash in terms of like just building high floor lineups based off usage, and then 10% into tournaments.
Right. And we know, we're going to get into that more throughout the night. A lot of DFS talk. But you won at DraftKings. Is that the only place you play, or is it kind of smart to get around a little bit?
I think it's definitely smart to diversify your portfolio, which I'm going to try to do more this year, because I kind of just play DK, but I think I'll definitely be hopping on other sites this year.
Right.
I play other sites, but not as much as I'm on DK.
Are there any more, like, I play FanDuel, DraftKings. Anywhere else you're playing that kind of piques your interest? Any of the smaller sites or the lesser known sites, or anywhere that you think you can gain a little advantage or an edge?
Well, definitely for the user base at Football Diehards, draft would be somewhere I'd definitely be looking into if I was a standard fantasy player just trying to make the transition, because that format is basically a very easy assimilation from what you're doing in standard to
in season long.
Getting over to daily, yes, season long. Yep.
What specifically about that is what makes it like that?
Just because it's draft based and there's no salary base, so you kind of you've been in a draft before. I think everyone that's kind of in this room is probably drafted.
Right. So you're basically drafting against other people. It's not like where everyone can have the same guys. You're in a small group. You're drafting like a regular season long draft, but it only lasts a week.
Yeah, and I think that you can get it's a lot easier. The competition, not a lot easier, but there's definitely more players that aren't playing as much DraftKings in salary-based games as there are on drafts. So,
differences between DraftKings and FanDuel that you find appealing, or anything you feel like you could take advantage of in one contest from the other?
Yeah, so FanDuel, you definitely have to be more Vegas-oriented, just because you have to have an idea of game script, because there is no PPR, so the game script can go away from a guy like David Johnson if the Arizona's like a 8-point dog or whatever, and then at the end of the game he's catching passes and it doesn't accumulate the points as it would on DraftKings. The game script kind of can't go away from a guy like David Johnson on DraftKings, but on FanDuel you definitely have to account for that. So I think you definitely have to be more on FanDuel. You definitely have to use Vegas like a lot more stricter, I would say, and you have to incorporate kickers as well.
The thing we all hate. Okay, so let's talk about kickers and defensive things, anything, what comes to mind?
So kickers, I like to look for kickers in a dome, kickers that are going to put up points in some way. Like, I think that, honestly, I don't know, weather's big with kickers, teams that score highly. I definitely in season-long fantasy, I'm trying to build a team that basically has a high. I'm going to take an early shot on a kicker just because a higher end kicker just because I want a team with a high floor week to week.
All right, Bobby Gomez. There you have it. Appreciate the time. Appreciate the information. Look forward to what you're going to bring to Football Diehards all this season, and get you on the radio to talk a little bit as well. So thanks a lot, and we'll catch you going forward. Yeah,
Bob. Thanks for having me. Football Diehards, guys. I'm very happy about joining the team. So look forward to interacting with you guys.
Yep. Check out the article in the Pro Football Forecast this year. Lays out some of these very principles. And we're going to go back for more DFS talk with Armando Marsal. By the way, after Armando, we're going to have Jen Ryan and we're going to have Jeff Mans both. Jen's going to get some into more of the gambling techniques associated with DFS. Jeff Mans is going to go off like crazy. And me and Armando are going to chop some of this information up a little bit more as well. I just want to let everyone know, again, if you've been here throughout the summit, we have to take a break, a mandatory break at 2 hours. That's going to happen at the bottom of this coming hour. If you've been here before, just stay where you are. It's going to come back. I might even come back. I will come back. But the video shuts down. We have to reload, and we'll get it all set up for you. And if you just stand by in the chat, you'll find that we have that it comes back and reloads and we reappear fairly quickly. And I think Armando's connection went a little bit lame, so we're going to bring him back. In the meantime, any questions on anything that Bobby was talking about? Or just any general questions? There's Armando back, but just any questions in general that came from Bobby, go ahead and throw them out, and Armando and I will kick them around when we get to them. But Armando, I just want to let you set the table for you right now. Go ahead and kind of throw out some of your thoughts, build on what Bobby said, and add to it if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that entirely. Great stuff you guys did there with the DFS breakdown. He made some great points. It's cash games, and basically you got two options. You got cash games, you got GPPs or tournaments, whatever you want to refer them to as. For cash games, you guys touched on a couple things that I think, in those type of formats. First, there's 50-50s, there's double ups, there's head-to-head. And then 50-50s and double ups have different field sizes, and I think that's very important. And there's also single entries in these types of formats as well. And if you're beginning, taking, don't jump into a huge 50-50 with, thousands of players. Maybe you want to jump into one with 100 players and a single entry where, the pros and the people that are playing huge volume that do this on a day-to-day basis aren't max entering these tournaments, because you're just not, doing yourself a favor when you play against these pros or play against, the people that are doing this a daily basis and are putting in 150 lineups into a double up. So I think choosing the right single entry, choosing the right 50-50, the right double up is also wise. That's something I started doing a little bit more last year. I was entering, the larger fields a couple years back, and I was doing well. But then, when everyone starts max entering these, and you're pretty much finding yourself on a 1-versus-1 player. And if the player that you choose doesn't do that well that week, you're pretty much not gonna cash in these situations, because you have other players putting in 150 lines, and it's just you kind of lose an edge there. So I think that's very important in cash games. I'm minimizing risk. I'm not looking for a ceiling. I'm not looking for upside. I'm looking for consistency production. I'm looking for high volume. For running backs, I like pass catching backs, guys that are very involved in the passing game, especially on DraftKings where it's PPR format. Floors. You're going to hear that pretty much throughout the night when you're talking about cash games. You're looking for players that aren't volatile, players that are typically going to give you a consistent, point per dollar. And ownership, just throw it out the window in cash games. You don't have to worry about a player being high owned. He's high owned for a reason. He's high owned because he's either really good, he's priced really well, or he's in a very good matchup, or it's just a phenomenal spot that you just don't want to give up. You can change that in GPP. You could change that mentality in GPP, but in cash, you just want to keep it simple. You don't want to overthink it. You don't want to, try to be contrarian and try to be different in a cash game when it's really not necessary. All you're trying to do is beat, 50% of the field in most instances, and what I try to do is just let other people make mistakes. I'm trying to be as safe and as, and as obvious as possible. It's a cash game. You're not going to win the top, there's not a top purse that you're trying to reach. You're just doubling up your money in most instances, and it's only beating out 50% of the field. In DPP, so I do take a totally different approach in GPP. There's, you guys mentioned there's the Millionaire Maker where, dreams come true, like Bobby. We saw him win $1 million, and we all trying to do that every Sunday. There's the single entries tournament. That's kind of where I'm focusing on, because I think that's where the bigger edge is, and the chances of winning are a little bit higher there. And you are not facing 150 lineups from some of these pros like you are in the Millionaire Maker. You're only facing one lineup. So it's my best lineup against your best lineup. And I'm okay with that. I'm comfortable with taking that kind of chance on a week-to-week basis. So I like the 3 max. I like the single entries. There's even 5 max and smaller GPPs. These great large fields, yes, they're very enticing. I mean, for God's sakes, I believe week 1, there's for $2 or $3. First place is 200,000. It's 800,000 players. Chances of winning that are very slim. You're really going to have to hit on every position. Whereas in these smaller fields, you can make a mistake or two, or that was in a phenomenal spot, it might let you down, but it's not going to ruin your Sunday. So that's the way I approach it. I do take ownership into consideration in tournaments. And I think, Bobby and I, we're actually doing a podcast together now. We mentioned that in last night's podcast, we talked about finding the chalk that you can avoid and finding the chalk that you just played no matter what, and I think a good example for week one is Alex Collins, if I'm not mistaken. He's playing the Bills. He's reasonably priced. I think he's going to be popular. He's 5,600, but rightfully so. The matchup is great. The Ravens are a favorite here. And Buffalo really struggled against running backs last season. In fact, they allowed nearly 18 rushing yards to running backs, 18 touchdowns, which is by far the most, rushing touchdowns, that is. 86 receptions, 633 yards, and 2 touchdowns to running backs. Great spot for him. So you know what? Even if he is chalk at that price point, I'm going to take my chances with him in tournaments, in GPPs, in cash games. He's just someone that I will not be fading. And just finding leverage spots. You guys talked about that. You touched base on that as well. I really think that's important. Where there might be a matchup for an offense that is not all that great, but I place a lot of emphasis on cornerback and wide receiver matchups. And yeah, there might be a fierce secondary, but they might be weak, against the slot receiver. And the slot receiver of their opposing offense could produce quality numbers and might have a decent floor. So maybe targeting him at a low ownership is something you want to consider. So those are kind of the two things I'm looking at cash games and GPPs here. There's a lot of moving parts, slate dependent, weekend dependent. It changes a lot. Sometimes I'm, price dependent. I think that's very important. And the first thing I do when I'm starting my research is I take a look at the prices, and I also take a look at matchups and Vegas numbers. I think, you guys went in depth about that, and I know you're going to talk about that with Jen later, and she's going to be able to, really dig into that. But I think Vegas is very important. Looking at line movements is also critical. We see sometimes late on Sunday, and people might not be watching, but late on Sunday before lock, a line will either increase significantly or drop significantly, and that changes a lot of the things of the aspect of the game. So I think that's something you really have to be looking into, and that's why paying attention right up until lock is very important between news, line movement, potential weather changes. And I know we've talked about it in years past, Bob, and you'll tell me, hey, unless there's a hurricane, I'm not placing too much emphasis, and that is true. That is true, but those are things those are the moving parts you got to consider, because that can also, change ownership. If there's bad weather, but it's not weather that you're too concerned about, that might change the opinion of other people. So paying attention to that might lead you into a great spot, simply because people are coming off because of weather situation. So paying close attention right up to lock is very important to me.
So in a cash game, you're not looking to zig where everyone's zagging, but in a GPP, the zig at the zag is a good idea. And I guess that's one of the things, maybe one of the reasons I like the GPPs is I'm trying to identify the players that are going to come out of nowhere. It's tricky business, but you're finding the cheap guys that do that. You wanted to talk a little bit about bankroll management as well, and I want to get your take on how you build your bankroll. I know it is through the cash games, but talk a little bit about how you portion your money, how much you spend on the various types of contests.
It's week to week for me. I mean, typically it's an 80-20. I'm putting 80% of my bankroll into cash games, 20%. But in last year, I did a little bit different. I did more of a 60-40, but I didn't play high variance GPPs. I wasn't playing a ton of the millionaire makers or a ton of the, like the $3, $200K for first tournaments. Yeah, I would submit my favorite lineup into these tournaments, but I did focus more on the smaller GPP, the smaller field GPPs, single entries, 3 max, because I just think that the variance there is a little bit lower. And then being that the cash games, the fields became so big, and there's still 150 entry max in these cash games, I started going more and focusing more on the single entries or the smaller field 50-50s, the smaller field double ups. So I allocated 60-40 on most weeks, but it's very, very week dependent. I think Bobby, mentioned that earlier, where there's going to be some weeks where it's just not worth playing cash, because it's literally everyone's going to be on the same player, and it's just maybe your defense versus someone else's defense. And the skill goes pretty much out the window when it comes to situations like that. So maybe that week just play you don't have to increase your bankroll allocation into GPPs. You could just play, instead of playing, 80 or 60, 40 or 80, 20, maybe just play your 20, 30, 40%, whatever it is in GPPs, and kind of, take it easy on cash, maybe not invest a full 80% of your bankroll, maybe just 40% that week, because it just doesn't make a ton of sense to invest so much on a week where maybe one or two players is going to be the difference between you cashing or not. And that you have to pretty much figure out as you play on a weekly basis.
Right. Now, not to oversimplify this, but I know there's some people out here who haven't played a lot. How do you look when you're in the lobby? How do you find the smaller field versus the large field? How are they labeled? What are you looking for?
You can actually filter it in the lobby. You can put, basically by you sort it out by price that you're willing, buying amounts, by field sizes. There's multipliers. There's 50-50s, there's winner take all. So you can really sort it out by all different forms of games. And you can even type it, at least on DraftKings, where I play most of the weeks, you can type in the top if you want to look for single entry. You just type single, and then all the single entry tournaments will pop up. You want to type three max tournaments will pop up. So there's different ways to find them. Once the prices come out for the following week, I just start reserving my seats in tournaments that appeal to me, and I'll create I don't create rosters until Sunday morning or Saturday night, the night before, because that's when I have all the information at hand that we need. And even then, sometimes we have to make changes because there's still pieces of information that are unknown. So if you look at the lobby on DraftKings, it's very self-explanatory. There are a lot of things that you have to use tools to search for what suits you best. And if I'm beginning, I'm looking for the smaller fields. There is tournaments, that as low as 9 players, you have that filter, so you can play tournaments that are going to be, under 100 buy-in. So it's what your target is and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're just trying to have a good time and you just want, try to field. If you just are in the mood to, $20 wins you $1 million, but knowing that chances are you're not going to get those $20 back. Hey, you know what? Just go ahead, have fun. It's relative to what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day.
Right, and I think that's talk about just make sure everyone understands. I mean, in some of those big field tournaments, you're playing people who are putting in how many lineups, maybe, Armando?
There's a ton of people that max enter. I have friends of mine, several friends in the industry that, do this professionally. And they're, one of them, he max enters pretty much every tournament he plays. And that's his process. His process is just the way he looks at it is it's like a hedge fund to him. And it's, he's hedging his plays. He's hedging his plays. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at his strategy. Doesn't work for everyone there, but a lot of the pros just max enter. And when you're facing people that really do their homework and people that really, do their research and take a ton of time to gather this information and put things together and put lineups together, and they're doing this 24/7 because that's their job. Facing 150 of their lineups is difficult when you're only playing 2 or 3. It really is. You're falling behind. So, which is why I try to stick to the single entries, because I'm comfortable playing, my best entry versus anyone's best entry. And there's going to be times where, my entry does well and sometimes it doesn't, but you minimize the risk you're taking and you better your chances to be profitable the long term.
Okay, so one of the things that you like to do is you like to check the prices when they come out. DraftKings, the prices are out. Let's look at by position some of the plays that you think are going to be. Look, we're a month out. But man, the prices are out. We want to look at them. So just talk through some of the quarterbacks in particular that you see that look appealing or interest you in the week 1 slate.
I have a lot of interest in Drew Brees week 1. He's at that price range. He's pretty expensive. He's $6,800. but it's a very good matchup. And when you look at the quarterbacks around him, Deshaun Watson is priced right under him. Tom Brady's only a couple $100 more, and those two quarterbacks are facing each other in the highest over under of the week. And then you got I've seen a couple places where they're excited about Russell Wilson's price at 6,200, which it is a good price. So I'm thinking Drew Brees is going to go overlooked here. It's a good matchup. Yes, he wasn't throwing as much as we're used to or accustomed to last season, but Mark Ingram's not going to be playing week 1. So I think some of that is going to fall on Drew Brees having to throw the ball. And I don't know if that's going to be something people are really paying attention to. And when you look at all the quarterbacks in that price range, it just makes a ton of sense to me to consider Brees because he does have that high upside. We've seen him, just shred defenses before. And this is a Bucs defense that really struggled against the pass last year, wasn't all that great. And Brees has a pretty strong history against them. He knows them very well. He's played them many times, same division. So something I am looking into week 1, someone I really do like. And when I'm looking at the lower, price, I have interest here, in Tyrod Taylor. It's just the price is just too cheap. I think he is going to be very popular, but I'm comfortable with his price tag at 5,400, taking him in cash because he just does a little bit of everything. He's a capable runner as a quarterback. He has a ton of weapons on this offense, so he offers at least, it appears he offers a nice floor, and at that low price range, you can really do a lot of great things with the rest of your lineup construction when you roster Tyrod Taylor. So he's someone that I'm going to be considering in cash games just because point per dollar wise, he's going to make a lot of sense. He's not going to have to score a ton of fantasy points to pay off that salary, and he's very capable of paying off that salary with what he does with his strengths. So as far as the quarterbacks, that's right now, that's where I'm at. There's a lot of other interesting spots, but that's, it's still early, and it's something that we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on during the preseason.
Right. Before we look at some of the other numbers, we do have a question from the viewers. And I know the answer to this. Do you put any value on using players playing at home versus players on the road?
Yes, I do. I think, running backs playing on the road that they're not favored have negative correlation. So I try to avoid those situations, even if the matchup is, great, even if the matchup is favorable, because there's just not good correlation. And this is just based on a lot of research that a lot of, websites have done. And I do a lot of reading on a week-to-week basis. And I pretty much do reading year long regarding these things, because once the season's over, I'm learning. And that's one of the things that, I emphasize when I talk about DFS. You never know too much. You just want to keep learning. I'm always trying to, pick the brains of some of the smartest in the industry. I'll toss ideas to them, hear what their process is, because their thought process is very important. So that's something that I really, really think is important if you're going to play DFS regularly. Just keep studying, keep learning, because you've never. And I used to play cards, a lot of poker, and I played for a living at one point. And they tell you, and it's something I learned then, you're never going to master the game. You can be very good at it, but it's a game that changes every year, changes every week, essentially. And you just have to learn how to evolve and grow in the game. And that's going to take time. It's going to take patience, but it's also going to take your effort and your due diligence. So study. Yeah, that would be the best advice for that.
Now, there is a brave soul out there who wants to know how you attack preseason DFS.
It's opportunity. And coach speak. That's where a lot of the coach speak comes in. If there's a player that they're trying to kind of get an idea for what they want to use him, how they want to use him, and they're going to give him snaps, you just take a chance with him. He might not play the snaps that they say he's going to play. He might not do much with the opportunity, but I'm looking for snaps. I'm looking for opportunity. And typically the first week is a little bit easier. Once you get to the second week, where some of the starters and some of the players that are going to be playing regularly during the regular season aren't playing as many snaps, it becomes tricky. That's when you kind of have to see what the coaches are trying to do, see who's doing well in practice, see who's doing well in training camp, see who might get some extra snaps because they want to see what they're going to do. And then there's just, that week where everyone's trying out. And that's the week where it becomes really fun, because that's the week where you're going to be playing players you probably didn't even know existed, because they're playing for a roster spot, so they're going to go out there and give it their all.
And guys tend to go off in preseason, right? I mean, whoever you – and so where are you looking to see – how are you looking to find out what the potential playing time is? Is it just total study? Are you focused on certain guys like, okay, so here's a team with a rookie, they want to get a good look at him, not like a Saquon Barkley, but maybe a guy they drafted a little later, maybe, the Royce Freemans of the world, those kind of guys, or some of the rookie wide receivers. It seems to me the rookie running backs are like safe plays early, the guys that were drafted a little later.
Yeah, I think going with the safer plays at running back and quarterback. I think we saw it last year with Mitch Trubisky, where they said it, he's going to play 2 quarters, and he played 2 quarters. And more often than not, coaches will give you an idea of how many quarters or how long a player is going to be out there, especially for like you mentioned, young quarterbacks, young running backs. They're going to take a look at him. They're going to kind of put him in a situation where you want to see what he's capable of doing. And with those opportunities come, fantasy points in most instances, because they're just going to be out there and putting in the work. So I think reading that week, like going game by game and just going team by team and looking through their beat writers, looking at news, I think is so important, because you're going to more often not find that piece of information dug in there somewhere where a coach wants to play their second string team, their second team offense 2 quarters. And if you know that maybe there's 2-3 possessions you have to take into consideration. They're going to be playing more possessions than the first team and and the third team. So looking at that week, you might want to be targeting the second, string. Whereas some weeks the starters are going to play the first full half. That's going to be production from the starters playing the first full half, and more production than most likely than the second and third that might only split a half.
All right, Bobby wants to know, with all the research, all the studying, all the knowledge, everything you put in, how much does luck play into DFS?
Luck plays into every fantasy sport season long. DFS. I mean, anyone that says otherwise, I think would be lying. There's definitely luck. There's chance in everything in life. I look at it that way, but it's a lot of prep, a lot of research, and a lot of time that you have to put in. And even the best players in the world or in the best matchups, they fail. They're going to fail sometimes. It happens. It's happened to me so many times where the rest of my lineup has been phenomenal, and that one player that was a lock, that chalk player that was a lock that week, he just comes out and does nothing. It happens. Right.
There's some of the things that you like to talk about. Take what the slate gives you in any week. Talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, I don't force players into my lineups. And that's why I start off. I'm looking at what the slate is giving me. It's a slate. This week is my lineup construction going to revolve around 3 running backs, because I feel that it's easier to create a more optimal lineup, a higher upside lineup by starting 3 running backs, because the pricing is favoring the running back position, and maybe for the wide receiver it's a little tougher. So understanding the pricing and the matchups and also the game slate, sometimes the games are broken down to different slate. The Sunday is broken down to different slates. Maybe if you don't like the entire day slate, you can start an early slate and play there if you like, the teams playing in that slate, and then avoid the afternoon slate. Vice versa, if you want to, play just the afternoon slate because you like the matchups, you like the pricing in that slate. So looking into the pricing and looking into what players are priced reasonably and what players are priced, where you feel comfortable paying for that. That's what I start my research with, and that's what I start my foundation with, because I don't like to force a player. Yes, Antonio Brown can be in a phenomenal spot, but if he's costing me too much of my salary, there's going to be opportunity costs that I'm missing here, and I'm going to be dealing with. So I might not want to do that despite him being in a great spot, because the price is not good enough for me.
Fantasy owners in general, we tend to chase points. how big of a problem is that for DFS owners? Is it easier to escape because you're setting a different, or is it actually harder because you have the entire, league to play with?
No, it's situations like that are at times, tough to read because at times we feel like we're chasing points. Reality, we're not. You just have to put everything into perspective when you're playing a player coming off of a huge week. You got to look at the price change of that player, the matchup that he was in the week before, the matchup he's going into this week. It's just totally dependent on the situation. I like to take advantage of recency bias. You guys talked about that first week. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a defense that is perceived to be stout all around, and Bobby, that's something we also talked about on the podcast. He made a great point. They're weak, not weak, but they're vulnerable against the run. And the Giants are going to be able to, run the ball here. They have an improved offensive line. You guys talked about Sherman, how he's just going to, feed Barkley here. So I think that's a great, play considering the low ownership and the price and the situation. So when you look at things like that, now if he has a great week against them and the following week he's just not in a good situation, and his price has gone to a level, near of Le'Veon Bell, then yeah, you might be chasing those points instead of playing a player in a better situation and a player who has been to be more proven. But I don't see how, looking at, a player when they do well and then going the next week and playing him again as chasing points, unless certain variables take into, play here.
All right, we're 4 minutes away from the bottom of the hour. Remember, the video we have a hard break, hard out. If you're in the chat area, just stay there. No need to do anything. We'll pop back up as soon as the video processes and we go to the next segment, which will feature Jen Ryan from footballdiehards.com, talking more DFS and gambling. And we'll finish up the night with Jeff Mans. Tomorrow, we're going to do a best ball draft with a number of the people involved here that you've seen over the last few days, and we're going to do it on MFL 10s and kind of analyze it as we go along. Should be interesting and fun exercise for those of you wanting to play the best ball and make a little money. That's an enormous insect in my house. I hope he doesn't bite. Real quickly, Armando, we are going to come to the hard break. Look at the top at each position. Give me your favorite play based on the price on DraftKings week 1.
Well, we talked about the quarterback, so I really do like Drew Brees. I'm very interested in Dalvin Cook and Alex Collins as far as running backs at their price point. I have interest in Marlon Mack at his price point, assuming he is going to be the starter week 1. As far as wide receivers are concerned, like that, 6K to 7K range, you have a lot of talent there. You have Stephon Diggs at 6,300. Chris Hogan, I think, is a phenomenal play at 6,100. T.Y. Hilton at 6,800. I think these are guys that are a little bit underpriced considering their upside, their potential here. Tight end, that's going to be the big question for everyone to pay or not to pay for Gronkowski. I know you're a fan. I know you're probably going to pay that 6,900 price tag. I just don't see myself doing it. I do like Jordan Reed quite a bit. The problem with Jordan Reed is his health. But if he's healthy week 1, you're only worried about it 1 week. He's very affordable on DraftKings in a pretty decent matchup here. So that's someone I'm going to probably be paying a lot of attention to throughout the preseason and making sure he's fine to start the season. And I also have some interest in Ricky Seals-Jones at 3K in a very good matchup here. And I typically tend to be a little bit more frugal with tight end positions and not pay too much. So that's kind of what's popping out to me at an early look here. But still a lot of time to things will change. We're going to see preseason. Everything's a moving part from here to the start of the season. So it's just keeping an eye on it, being up to date and things like that.
DraftKings loves me. They're trolling me with the Gronk price, and I'm just like a fish. Give me the bait. Give me the bait. So, all right, Armando, great spot. And just quickly, in 30 seconds, talk about flex.
I like to get creative. There's weeks where, playing 2 tight ends makes a ton of sense, in GPPs and or cash games. So use that flex position wisely. I mentioned earlier there's going to be weeks where playing 3, running backs makes a ton of sense. Sometimes playing 4 wide receivers makes sense. So just when the slate gives you something, take it and use that flex wisely. Try to get creative with that position because that's where you can be different than other, lineups that you're going up against. That flex spot, it could be the difference maker.
And when DraftKings gives you a $6,900 price tag on
Don't do it. Don't
buy
do
it.
it. Don't buy it.
Everyone hang tight again. We've got the hard break coming in about 25 seconds. The video will recycle. We'll pop back up. You remain in the chat. We will return, and we'll be back with Jen Ryan for a half hour talking DFS and gambling, Vegas stuff, and Jeff Mans from Guru.
Right. We are live for the final part of Tuesday night. Bob Harris will be here in a moment, and we're going to have Jen here with him to do DFS and some gambling stuff. That's going to be fun now that gambling is something that becomes more interesting with the laws that are going to be changing here soon. And then after that, Jeff Mans with the Guru Elite, the guy who's quite interesting to listen to. So that'll be coming up in a minute here, and I'm just going to sit here and you guys get to stare at me. Been kind of good conversation. I'm not a great DFS player, and I really think it's exciting to see all these people who really know what they're doing. And we've got Bob Harris back.
Bob Harris, hack DFS player, easily trolled by DraftKings, apparently. We're going to bring Jen back up. I am easily trolled by DraftKings. Look, I am a sucker for the GPPs. It's like buying a lottery ticket to watch the Sundays. I love sitting around, and it's just like, ooh, what's going on? I've had some nice weeks, very solid weeks. I've had some miserable weeks like the rest of you. But, some of these people who play the cash games, you're going to hear from Jeff Mans, who does this like nobody's business. But first, you're going to hear from my friend and colleague, Jen Ryan from thefootballdiehards.com. Going to talk a little DFS and gambling. I hear that's legal now, Jen. What do you know about this?
It is legal. Fortunate for me, I am from New Jersey, the state that pioneered the legalization, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and here we are. We can finally, spend our money as we see fit as adults right here on the East Coast rather than take all our money to the offshore books. And it's great. I mean, it's exciting. It's a part of my weekly research anyway. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I love placing my prop bets. I made a trip 2 weeks ago to the Monmouth racetrack for the Monmouth Sportsbook, of course, in the name of research for the summit. And I got a few of my first live bets in. It felt really good. I'll be waiting for those prop lines. Generally they don't come out until the Friday or Saturday night before week 1, but we do have some season-long stuff. There's a lot of things available. I'm so sorry the dog is chewing on a toy.
All right. Dogs chew. That's what they do. I have them off.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, he's not even my dog, but that's besides the point. But yeah, so I made my trip down to Monmouth. I got to see the action. It's a great setup. I'm excited to go to the Meadowlands, which is coincidentally right in my backyard. That's where the FanDuel Sportsbook is. And, if you've been listening to Bobby, Armando, anybody who was on tonight, you kept hearing Vegas lines and the importance of Vegas lines, and it's just like it's kind of like the beginning part of the research for everybody. I'm sorry, I just want to get this damn thing out here.
Go ahead, take care of the dog.
Stop.
Everyone should have a dog with a squeaky toy because that's what dogs like.
His mom is on vacation, so he's stressed it out a little bit.
So just so we could say, Jen comes on serious with me on a weekly basis throughout the entire season, and if we don't hear from the dog, I worry. So this is very comforting to me, and I miss the dog. Looking forward to seeing him.
He's calm. But as I was saying, so yeah, as Bobby had touched on a bunch during his segment, and as Armando had touched on during both of his segments, it's sort of just in general where DFS players tend to start the research is those Vegas lines, checking out the high point totals, and taking a look at the implied totals and things like that. What I really like to get into in the season is the player props. But getting right into it, we have week 1 salaries already. We already have week 1 lines. So if you have already imported your salaries into some sort of a basic spreadsheet, you've already started kind of looking around, what you can do is you can jump on any one of these betting sites. You don't even need an account to do the research. I mean, I have an account at one, but you can hop right in to get your weekly lines and begin sort of building what I use as my like weekly DFS/gambling spreadsheet. So just to give you an idea of what some of these lines look like, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you. So share, and then if you hop in, you have to log. Oh, I'm still logged in. Perfect.
There it goes.
So,
yep.
So as you can see, for the true degenerates out there like myself, we have some preseason action, right? But because we're going to keep this at the DFS spin, and I'm not really touching on preseason, let's just go right down to week 1 so that we can kind of start looking at games you're going to want to target. So here's your Thursday night game, which is not available in the first run of at least DraftKings salary releasing. But right off the bat, here's your week 1. You can see here's your spread line, and anytime you see the negative, if you're not super familiar with gambling, that's your favorite. Here's your point total. So as you kind of scroll through, you can see, okay, Steelers are favored on the road. We know how Ben is on the road. This is something that we're starting to think about already. We both Bobby and Armando touched on home underdogs, and now here's the Browns as an example. Here's a home underdog at home, playing from behind in a decent sized point total. So these are like, as I kind of go through the lines in the beginning, these are the things that I'm rattling off in my head. I'm kind of looking at each one and seeing what kind of DFS implications we might have. And if you keep scrolling down, now you have your 51-point game. Now, especially in week 1, that's the type of game that people are going to attack. They're going to attack these 49, 50, 51-point totals. And what you could do to kind of get yourself a little of an edge is maybe go right under those. I mean, there's not a huge difference between a 48-point, 47-point, and 49.50. So maybe you get exposure to some players that not everybody's chasing for the highest point game, because that's one of the big things. You're obviously chasing the points. You're not super interested in a low point total, on the surface. It's all part of what you piece together and interpret. So again, here's your spreads, your overs and unders. This is what everything pays out based off the odds. And then, as I said, I like to bring this all into a spreadsheet with my DraftKings data so that I can kind of start to build up my research for the week. Because again, it's all connected. It all starts with Vegas, at least for me and for some of us. So an example of what the spreadsheet will start to look like for me, I have all my players, and this data is available right from the DraftKings website. We, of course, offer not only salary data for both DraftKings and FanDuel on footballdiehards.com, but we also have this cool stat that Emil has. It's kind of the V factor, and it shows you what a player needs to hit value that week. And it's another column you can add. I mean, as you can see, I have some columns here that I haven't started working on yet. Some of it is prop lines, which I won't have until the season starts. But, just kind of going through, I like to look at my salary. I like to kind of visual. So kind of see, here's my over under, here's my spread, where it falls within the range of all the other players on the slate for the week. Here's your implied total for each team, which is simply the total points divided by 2. And you take the spread divided by 2, add it to the favorite, take it away from the underdog. And as you can see, I've already started doing some research. I must have updated Le'Veon Bell's strip clubbing today. I don't know why that has an impact on his potential play for me week 1. But I just kind of go through and I take my notes based off of salary, based off of the Vegas stuff. And then, as you can see, I'll add columns throughout. And again, just to stress, I mean, you heard from Bobby before, guys won $1 million. You heard from Armando, he's like a top DFS guy. You're hearing from me right now, who I love to play often, do okay, much better at prop betting and I guess interpreting Vegas, which is why I'm kind of talking about it tonight. But it's all so intertwined, and it's all just part of the basic research for for your DFS for the week. So it's really where a lot of people are going to begin for the week. And it's a really good starting point. And then once we get these prop lines, now we can almost form a projection out of it. If a particular player has, like, for 4.5 catches, 65 yards, and maybe a touchdown, you can start to build a decent projection for at least an average of what that player might do that week. And it's really just kind of, there's so many pieces to the DFS puzzle every single week, and the Vegas over-unders are a part of it. I just like to take it a step further and dig into those player prop lines as well.
So let me just jump in here. The news and the information is my specialty. I talked about on day one of this, you listen to the 5 versions of the truth. The coach is telling you something, the player is telling you something, the local beat writers are all telling you something, and it's all a big bowl of light. You pull that thread of truth out of all those comments, because the truth is there. The whole story is there. You just have to figure out the different versions of it. This sounds similar to me, where you're looking at all the various aspects of the Vegas putting out, and there is no shortage of that in terms of the prop bets. And you're kind of doing the same thing. You're pulling out that line of fact that you can hang your hat on and succeed in these things.
Absolutely. And look, the odds are against us in DFS and in gambling. We're not supposed to win. The house is supposed to win, and the DFS site is supposed to win. If we were all winning all the time, the sites wouldn't exist and the books wouldn't exist. It's a huge game of variance. We're more likely to lose than we are to win, and we're more likely to be wrong than we are to be right every week, and we have to take these things into consideration. So when we pull all this different information and we take, like you said, coach speak, and we look at it a little deeper, and we take a simple Vegas line and we look at it a little bit deeper, now we're just getting more. We're getting more information. We're looking at it from different angles, and anything to get that edge, right? To try to get that money.
Right. So when you're looking at the Vegas line, are you looking at, Bobby mentioned, trying to exploit possible errors? Is that something you're doing as well? And if so, how are you doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, back to Bobby, he mentioned instinct, and this is all about instinct. I mean, each week when you're betting on yourself too. I mean, it's still variance. It's still gut feelings that come with that. And if you have a little bit of experience, you become a little better at it. But that's one of the things I love to do. I love, now that I have the preferred website I was using and a sports book, I'm going to be able to compare those lines and see where I want to throw my money that week. I also look for individual game line totals that kind of seem a little off to me and maybe a little too generous, and I look to exploit that. And if I could just pull my spreadsheet up one more time, I feel like we have to talk about the New Orleans Saints and Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. And I just want to pull it up real quick, because if I am not mistaken, the highest, can you guys see my screen?
It's coming. Yep, there you have it.
Great. All right. So again, simple Excel, simple filters. You go to the spread and you sort largest to smallest, and you scroll through your pick'ems, and you kind of get down here. Look at the Saints. They're favored by 10.5 points, which tells me on the other side of the ball, the Bucs are dogs by 10.5. That's so much. That's a huge total. And as you can see, I've already started making a few notes here, wondering if Kamara is going to be the chalk. Wonder if Breeze is going to be the chalk. And if maybe Fitzpatrick, who's going to be playing from behind on such a huge deficit, but still with a very large point total, approaching 50 points. These are the types of things I look at when it comes to lines. 10.5 to me, that's a lot. I'm very much so going to be throwing money on the Bucs there. Now, again, what that means is the Bucs don't have to win. They just can't lose by 10. They just have to lose by just 10 points. So if you figure they lose by a touchdown and a field goal, you're cashing your bet if you're betting, straight bet on them. So those are the sorts of things I like to look at, because, again, this is offshore book, 10.5 points. Last time I checked the Vegas book, it was 8.5. So it's a little more generous over here. Those are the things when it comes to betting that I like to look at. And again, you can get this all with your filters, but I always reset my filter, of course, to salary.
Right. So I guess, look, a lot of this is experience. And we all watch this. We're all setting lineups. So basically gambling, it's like the feel there's a lot of feel that goes into this. You like something, Vegas doesn't like it. How do you, I mean, just like gaining the confidence to do this, how long has it been for you to gain the kind of confidence to challenge what the Vegas odds makers are saying?
I lose confidence every time I lose a bet, but then I build it back up when I start doing research and I place them next week. I mean, look, the guys in Vegas and the line makers, they're very, very good at their jobs. You say it all the time, Vegas knows what they're doing. It's, you know, I think as long as you're, you know, responsible, I think as long as you're not betting completely out of control and you're staying within your own means and truthfully, I think as long as you're having fun too, that's really the confidence you need. And when it comes to trying to exploit a line, it's almost like you're in competition with the book, no different than when you're in competition with a field when you're in a DFS matchup. You just want to see if you can get the best of them that week.
Right. And I guess so going forward on the prop bets, I know this is something you like. How many will you play in a given week? What kind of exposure will you have in a given week? Without money, just the number of bets.
You know, it really depends because I'll start in the beginning of the week when the lines are really generous and the odds are good. And then I track the line movement. So if that player's odds get even deeper and even more of a long shot, maybe I'll throw another low amount of money on top of it. I would say in a given week, I'm not really one to hedge. So who I'm playing in DFS, I'll take 4 or 5 of those guys, depending upon what the line looks like and what I like and what lines I set, because some sites also let you set lines. You know, I'll back up my bets. That way, I'm much more of an all or nothing. I know some people in that sense, if you were more to hedge, maybe you would go and place some prop bets on players that you have no exposure to in DFS for the week to kind of, you know, offset it if you take a hit on one or the other. But I would say 4 or 5 players, depending. Almost always my quarterback. I like betting touchdowns and yards. I like to, you know, cheer at my TV. So I'd say about 4 to 5 players a week I'm throwing prop bets at.
Is hedging something you do in DFS as well as in betting?
I don't. I know it's for sustained. I should say this: if you want sustained success in DFS, and this is something you want to pursue as your, you know, primary, maybe even your primary income, but just something you want to come out of the season profiting, then you're going to want to hedge a little bit. I'm more of, I like to go a little all or nothing when it comes to DFS, and I'm not advocating that. That's just simply my style. I'm much rather, let's say over the course of the season, my bankroll is $1,700. I'd much rather risk it all to win a lot than risk it to profit 300, you know? So it's not really for me. I'm more likely to double down than I am to hedge.
Do we have the same issues in gambling and that we have in fantasy season long and DFS, things like recency bias? And what do you do to avoid these things?
You absolutely do. So a lot of the lines really are set off of the last week, and you try not to get trapped in it. So to avoid it, I won't really chase a bet unless I like to look at, and again, this is something we provide on Football Diehards, I like to look at 3-week samples. So like if you go on our site, our scoring, our targets, snaps, everything, we have a lot of stuff in the context of 3-week samples. So I'm not liable to chase until I see a small amount of consistency, and the 3-week sample works pretty good for me. But I mean, you know, if something feels good, you go for it. But it's interesting to see the book correct. 2 seasons ago, it's the best example I can give you. The book had that the Cardinals Seahawks game would go to overtime, and you could also bet that it would end in a tie. That game went to overtime, ended in a tie that week, and of course the next week you couldn't bet any game to end in a tie because they got clobbered a little bit. So they're pretty good at correcting, you know, their lines based off of what happened last week.
We do have a question, and I think this is worthwhile for the beginners. Can you give just a further explanation of chalk, good chalk, bad chalk, but just, you know, the basic premise of chalk?
Yeah, so chalk, in a nutshell, I think we can agree it's going to be the highest owned player. It's going to be the bet that everybody's going to make. It's going to be the quarterback everybody wants to pay up for. It's going to be the receiver everybody rosters, the running back, and then, like, you know, your overall chalk. It's just the highest owned player, and it's going to be the biggest bet. It's going to where all the public money is going. There's many resources out there where you can project ownership, and, you know, that's sort of how you can project chalk. And if you pay attention throughout the week to the noise on Twitter, this is something I wrote a little bit about in the magazines this summer. I'm always paying attention, because once one of these pros or these really top guys, like a Jeff Mans, for example, who's coming up after me, Jeff mentioned somebody on Twitter on Tuesday that he likes. By Friday, everybody likes them, and everybody's going to be playing them. So these are the types of things that I look for, and it's almost like some of these really sharp guys can almost set the chalk. But you know, cash games, you're gonna roster it. GPPs, you might fade it a little bit.
Right, and so I think this is let's take this a step further, because we are playing. You and I will be playing, and we'll be covering it here tomorrow night. Best ball. It's you, me, Jeff Ratcliffe, Mike Dempsey, who's in how many? 150 already.
That's it.
Geared up in 3 today. Mike Beers, John Law, Bobby Gomez is going to play. Emil is going to play. Hussein the Brain is going to play. Brad Cruz, Gary Davenport, Casey Joyner. All of us, most of all of us who you saw throughout the week here, are going to play in a little best ball. Are there any, gambling and DFS tactics that go into best ball, or is it a totally different thing?
No, they're really. I mean, if you're still drafting now, so about 2 weeks ago, your player props season long player props came out, right? So you can, like, I can pull it up and dig it up, but off the top of my head, I know Todd Gurley, for example, right? His line for touchdowns, total touchdowns, 16.5. That's a lot. That's, I'm probably taking the under on that, but I'm keeping that in mind when I'm evaluating players we want to draft. If Vegas likes him around 16 touchdowns, well, there's a reason he's going first overall. It's a tall order, but that's a lot of points. I'll take a look at quarterback yards. I'll see which quarterbacks are projected over 4,000 yards for the season, things like that. And of course, you're going to want to look at game totals. A team who's projected 4.5 wins, you might not. In context, you're going to look at that a little further. Maybe you're going to fade some of those players. Maybe you're going to fade that running back, but maybe you're going to load up on, the Jets come to mind, your Robbie Andersons, your Quincy Enunwas, because there's going to be a lot of throwing and playing from behind in those games. So you can absolutely, for best ball purposes, take a look at season-long lines and just, again, another piece of that research that you can add to the puzzle.
So when we're drafting them, I've drafted, I'm always rue when I find you in a draft room when I go into an MFL 10. Mike Beers, the same. Mike Dempsey, to a degree, because, we're on the radio for an hour or so every day, and we like every player the same, so every player's ADP goes up. You take all this into account as you're drafting with a group like this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so tomorrow night, for example, when we're drafting, ADP is going to be close to meaningless to me. And I think to most other people, because we saw it in the magazine drafts throughout the summer too. You want a player when you're playing with these type of people, you might need to jump a round or two to get them. Also, a guy like you, a guy like Mike, I've been in a couple of drafts with you guys. I'm sort of learning your tendencies and your players a little bit. I've been in drafts with Mike Beers. I'm good friends with Mike Beers. I have an edge against you, Mike, because I know how you think. No, I'm just kidding. But it's like, enough people that you're in these expert drafts, you can kind of try to anticipate what they're doing, but for the most part, ADP is just going to be out the window. It's going to be a free for all with ADP, because we don't really care about it in these sorts of drafts.
And that is true. So when you're not drafting with us, when you're just out there doing an MFL 10 and you're in with a group of players, how close do you? I mean, how much more does ADP factor into those drafts? Are you a little more comfortable waiting on players towards the ADP? Or are you still being aggressive and going and getting your people?
To a degree. I mean, it truthfully, it really depends on the draft. But I touched on this a little bit and the other night when I was talking about best ball ADP. It's just a guide. It is not a constraint. Now, when you're in these leagues with names, that you completely don't recognize, sure, you can make an assumption that they're players that aren't in a ton of these MFL 10s. So you will see some players, particularly vets, start to tumble a little bit. If I notice that happening, then yeah, I'm liable to wait a little bit and see how late I might be able to get a certain player. But it is the first thing I do. When I get the notification that my league is up and running, I get right in there. I immediately look at who else is in there and sort of give myself my own odds of my chances at winning this thing.
Okay, and if people missed it, they didn't see you the other night. Talk about some of your most owned players so far in best ball. Let's go by position. Start at quarterback. Who have you been investing heavily in?
Quarterback, loving Phillip Rivers. That guy is just he's consistently available way past any of his final finishes over the last 9 seasons, and it's just so great to be able to get him so cheap. Alex Smith too. A little surprised how much he's fallen outside of the top 12. I feel like he's kind of locked to finish inside. Running back, we talked about this. Full disclosure: an embarrassing amount of DeMarco Murray. It was early on.
Early.
Yeah. LeGarrette Blount, I have some exposure to. Theo Riddick. Receivers, and I actually forgot to mention this the other night, and I wanted to come back, jump in the chat and be like, Bob, I forgot to mention Cam Meredith. He's one of my highest owned receivers. Gotta love his projected role in New Orleans this year and in that offense. And he's a guy who I suspect might be pretty high owned week 1. And then for tight end, I have a ton of Cameron Brate. Too much Tyler Eifert now that he scared us a little bit with that beginning on Pup right there, and then that's it. That's where I stand at the moment.
And that's kind of encouraging that what Casey Joyner was saying about Alex Smith earlier. One of his QB2s that he thinks can put up QB1 numbers. Go check his article out at ESPN.com. That'd be very enjoyable. I have a last gambling question here for you. Yes. Where do you go to do your prop bets? What site?
My preferred site, and it's simply because of where I live. So in New Jersey, because we have casinos, we're not allowed to gamble on the Vegas books. So I've always just gambled on Five Dimes. But the nice thing about Five Dimes, if I could give them a totally unsolicited endorsement, their lines are loose. They always are. You always get a point and a half in your favor. They also have this fantastic tool called the Bet Builder. So let's say you like Nelson Aguilar for 4.5 points. You can keep going, and the odds get higher, longer shots, but a better payout. So maybe you want to bet them for 7 catches. You're going to have that option on the Bet Builder. It's a really cool tool. If anybody has trouble navigating it, just reach out to me. I absolutely love toying around in there.
And there we have it. We're going to wrap up with Jen here. I want to thank you again for all the segments you've done on this and for getting ready to come back tomorrow for the final segment. Remember, everybody, that'll be starting tomorrow night. We'll be cranking up a little later at 9 o'clock, and we'll run a full draft on MFL 10s to kind of run you through a draft, show you how it works. If you haven't seen it, we'll be analyzing picks. Jen, myself, Mike Dempsey, and it's a great crew that we have. Once again, it's myself, Jen, Dempsey, Jeff Ratcliffe, Mike Beers, John Lobb, Bobby Gomez, Emil Kadlik, Hussein the Brain, Brad Cruz, Gary Davenport, and Casey Joyner. Should be a very good time. So, Jen, look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. And thank you again. Give that dog his toy back, please.
I am about to right now. He's been so good. He's sitting right next to me. Thank you, Bob. Can't wait for tomorrow.
All right. Looking forward to it again. Again, if you all didn't realize what was coming next, you're about to find out. It's going to be horrifying. There's no frosted tips in this one, but I'm surprised. I'm a little saddened by the frosted tip era appears to be over at the Jeff Mans. And if you don't know him, you should. It's Jeff Mans. You know him from Guru Elite. You follow him on Twitter at Jeff Mans. By the way, I didn't ever give out Jen's Twitter at FFDGenerate.
Oh, yeah.
My bad on that. And you can go to the Twitter right now and check on my feed, and you'll see it right there. But welcome to Jeff Mans from Guru Elite, one of the huge, awesome websites, and also my co-host Sunday mornings on the Sirius XM. Actually, he's the host, and I'm like the co-host. I'm like the junior partner on this thing. Jeff, how are you?
I just do the pushing the wheelbarrow. You fill it up with good trinkets and everything else. So that's great. Great introduction there, Bob Harris. By the way, I love Bob's TV in the background. It's my favorite thing. I'm like watching Bob's TV more than anything else. What's going on the TV? Look at you. You're big old setup. Everybody, I knew Bob Harris when he had one TV. That is a true statement that we were very good friends back in those days. But yeah. All right. So we were talking some daily fantasy here. Great job by Jen, Ryan, doing an amazing job talking about the gambling element, talking about the daily fantasy element here as well. We'll take questions in the chat room if you guys want to get to that. I'll go over my spiel here. Just a quick synopsis, basically, of how to win in daily fantasy. I've been very fortunate enough. That's why I would still be frosting my hair if not for several $100,000 wins in daily fantasy football. So it all comes down to this. Here's what I want everybody to do. All right. I think the most important thing everybody can do is really look internally and decide what kind of player you are. If you're going to play daily fantasy football this year, that's awesome. It's wonderful. But have some sort of plan, because I'll tell you straight up, everybody, that if you're one of these people that are going to do this style in week 1, that style in week 2, I'm going to play this contest in week 3 and that contest in week 4, you're what we call a fish. That's where these companies make all their money. That's where people like myself and others just feed off of those people that don't really have a plan and that are playing in contests they're not supposed to, or at a higher level than they're supposed to, or playing lineups that are just never really going to win. So it is a mathematical equation in a lot of respects here. So let's get to it. Everybody needs to come up with a plan. For one, I would love everybody to budget. Create a budget. People just don't do that in today's day and age. They don't create like, all right, 17 weeks of regular season. If you play preseason or playoffs, fine, more. But how much are you going to spend? $100, $200, 500, 10,000, whatever that number may be. You should set aside your budget. Deposit that amount. Don't give these companies extra money than you're going to spend. No, you don't want to be cash poor. It's a bad financial decision. So go into it with an idea. All right, I'm going to go 17 weeks. Oh, I'm going to go on vacation 1 week, so I'm only going to play 16. Whatever it is, and you're going to play X amount every week, $10, $5, $100, whatever that number is, and say, okay, and now once you have that plan and you set up some bankroll parameters, I always look at it as like my wife giving me the allowance. That's basically what I do. Like, how much can I get? Really? Well, what if I lose a little more? Oh, okay. No more? You take all the money? Okay. That's basically the man's household conversation. So once you decide all that, once you decide how much you're going to play, then I want everybody to look internally and say, all right, what kind of player are you really? Because I know the answer, what you're going to say. It's all lies. It's again, like I go out drinking with the boys. I come home. My wife's like, what'd you guys do? Oh, nothing, just hung out. It was really kind of boring. Really, I'm like, got tattoos on my lower back and everything else. There's usually a lot of other things going on. You're all going to say you want to deposit a little bit of money and you want to win a lot of money, right? That's the dream. That's what we want to do. Millionaire maker. Oh, millionaire maker. Let me follow you down the path of destruction. Guess what the secret of the millionaire maker is? Nobody wins it. Nobody real. Oh, Drew Dinkmeyer and Al Smizzle. Yes, true. But they played a half a decade every single week, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lineups every single week. If you're going to do that, go for it, baby. Go to the millionaire maker. Get in there and do your thing. But if you're not, if you're reasonable, if you have a limited budget, maybe you just try to do something different. Maybe you don't try to qualify for a live final. Maybe you don't try to win the $1 million, as great as that may be. Maybe if you really want to make some income and positive energy and put it into the world, maybe you play cash games. What are cash games? 50-50 contests, heads up are also considered cash games. Personally, I'm not a heads up guy. I don't play head-to-head in any fantasy sport. The reason being, I feel there's too much variance. I don't exactly know what I'm getting into when I choose an opponent. For one, if you are going to play head-to-head, don't ever post yours to the room and let somebody pick you apart. Guess what the secret is? All of us go into there and pick out the unskilled players' games. That's what happens. It happens all the time. So you need to choose your opponents. You get in there to the head-to-head lobby. You choose the matchups you have if you're going down that route. I don't like that route because what I think is the best idea in a fantasy football week is me playing single entry, I mean one-on-one. I don't like fighting 5-on-1, haven't since my junior college days. So I like to go in, fight everybody one-on-one. I like 100 to 1,000 people in cash games. And by the way, I didn't say this, but I am a cash game player. That's where I make the bulk of my money in every single sport, every sport that I play, which really only baseball and football for me. But so I like single entry cash game, 100 to 1,000 participants. All right. I load up. I will play a ton of them. I'll play every single one of them on the site if it's deeper into the season and I'm up money and all that good stuff. So what I think this does is I feel that if you're a seasonal player, let's go this route. If you're a seasonal player and you're doing a draft, Jen Ryan just got through with a great best ball dissertation, right? the one problem with any fantasy football seasonal league, whether it's the high stakes leagues or a best ball league, whatever, they only pay out the top 3. Imagine though, if they had top 6. Everybody in the chat room, I want to see everybody in there. Do you guys think you could finish in the top 6 of your fantasy football league? Or better yet, every fantasy football league? We know we're not going to win the championship in every league, but if you do 10 leagues, I think you're going to finish in the top 6. If you got a trophy and you got money, cash, whatever, the same amount that the number 1 seed gets, if you got that, that would be something that might interest you, right? That's the way I look at daily fantasy football. And yeah, quite possibly, everybody, yes, quite possibly. And that's the way I look at it. Why not just go for broke? Why not just play? I feel I could build a lineup that's in the top 50% of everybody else, all my opponents across the board on any site anywhere. I strongly feel that way, and history says I've been pretty good at that. So, and I think a lot of you guys out there are better than me, better than Bob Harris, believe it or not. Don't tell him I said that. But, you guys are very good. You're qualified, everything else. But you're playing these contests where you're trying to win a dream. Okay, the dream is wonderful. The dream is fantastic. But how about this? Instead of using your $100 from your paycheck to fund that dream, how about you use the $100 from your paycheck to fund another $100? Oh, how about that? Or another $100 or $200, and use that up money, that free money, that house money. Use that to chase your dream. Use that money for the qualifier. Use that for the milli maker, and build and build and build and double and double and double. That's the way to build. You build a bankroll that way. You stay in the game. You're not redepositing. You're not taking money from your personal bank account. You're playing with the up money, and just go that route. That's the way to do it in my experience. And when you're in that scenario and you're playing a cash game, so again, head to head, just to go back to this, you don't know who you're playing. You could be playing me. You could be playing Harris. You could be playing somebody from the chat room. You could be playing your Aunt Sally. You don't really know who you're playing. And that Aunt Sally may have a lineup that scores 230. And, the cash line in a 50-50 is 130, 140. See, that's the thing. The cash lines in 50-50 single entries are usually quite stable, 120 to 130 points. Always right in there. Sometimes it's a little lower, sometimes a little higher. But if you build a lineup that's going to consistently jump over that bar, guess what, baby? You're in the money time and time and time again. So that's the way to go. That's the way I've had a lot of experience. And again, I understand it's not going to appeal to some of you. Some of you, this mentality will resonate. Some of you will say, no, screw that. I want the $1 million. I want the 100,000. That's fine. If you guys have disposable income to throw, awesome. No problem with that. We'll talk to you guys in just a moment. So that's kind of my mentality when it comes to playing daily fantasy sports in general, and especially in daily fantasy football. I like to play those cash games. And again, it's one of those things. You could play just 2 or 3 contests, right? Let's say you play $15 a week. How about you play three $5 single entry between 100 and 1,000 participants, right? And once your bankroll grows, guess what this magical thing you can do? Enter more contests. Boom, 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 boom. So you win. You put in 15, you win 12 back, roughly. That's about the cut, the rake that the sites take. So you win 12 there, you win 12 there, you win 12 there. Now all of a sudden you're up $36. Guess what? Play that $36. Now you won that. Now you're doubling 36, turns into 32, and the 32 is a 64, and then 128, and 256, and so 512, so on and so forth. And all of a sudden you build. You could just play more, play more, play more, play more, play more. And you're sort of emulating a GPP, all right? But you don't, in a GPP, guaranteed prize pool, for those of you wondering what the acronym stands for, a tournament, if you will. The thing with those is only the top 15% get paid out. And I'll tell you what, between 5 and 15%, those payouts are garbage. You're barely doubling your money. In fact, from like 12 to 15%, you're not even doubling your money. And so what's the real point? So 15% of the entire field is getting paid out. Yes, it's got a massive top prize, but one person wins that out of thousands and thousands and thousands. So I'm not into that. Why not just put that same lineup into a single entry cash game and build it even more? So hopefully everybody, and Sally is a DFS hustler. Hopefully you guys are understanding, what I'm getting at right there. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest about your style of play. We're not all Aunt Sally hustlers. We're not all high stakes, high rollers. Some of us, our paycheck actually means a lot to us, or maybe other people that we have dependence on. So if you're playing that way, there's nothing wrong with it. And you can still do some things being a cash game player that allows you that upside, right? You can still get a bigger return. You have to risk a little bit more. But again, 50% to 15%, I don't know. That's pretty good math. I'll take that 35%, and I will never feel shame in finishing in the 48th percentile, because guess what, baby? I won the same amount as the lineup that hit 300 and won first place in those contests. Doesn't matter at all. I scored 128. We got the same amount of cash. So that's all that really matters. So that's important to me. That's the way I built my bankroll. And again, now parlaying this into qualifiers and GPP, I've been fortunate to win a live final in fantasy football, won another one in daily fantasy baseball, finished third in another one, daily fantasy baseball. But again, I'm a cash game player. I did what I said before. I built the bankroll, and then I once I get to a certain amount, I will allocate, okay, I'm $12 towards a qualifier this week, 24 towards a qualifier, 36, 48, 60, 72, 84, 96. I will just keep upping it every week and throw more to qualifier if that's what my goal is, or towards a GPP, the millionaire maker, or what have you. So, that's my idea. That's how I parlay it into GPP. And that way, if I lose GPP, it's okay, because I'm replenishing with all my cash game winnings. All right. So 100-person single entry cash game guy. Yeah. 100 or more, Dennis Roy. I like 100 or more people. When you start getting down, let's say, you say, all right, man, I'll take your word for it. I'm playing in a 10-person single entry. 10 people, again, you can get, you got to imagine. It's like Bob Harris at the airport, and when he's photobombing everybody, at least 70% of those people are dumb, right? Or like mouth-breathing heathens. Something's wrong with most of those people, right? Maybe 70's high, but you got any contest you enter, it's the same thing. Somebody might be stacking the Jets one week, even this year. Like Sam Darnold and Jermaine Kearse, they don't look good in training camp. I'm going to stack them. And what do you know? Jets are down 38-0 at halftime, and they passed the entire second half. What do you know? Final score is 52-21, and Kearse and Darnold had 3 touchdown receptions. And all of a sudden, you're like, God damn, that actually worked for these idiots. I don't want to be a part of that. Like, that person will finish easily on the bottom. If I have to deal with 5 of those, some of them, or 6 of them, one of them is going to win, and that will piss me off right quick. That's why you don't get as much variance in at least 100 people. Right? The more people you add to your cash games, the less variance you take out. That pay line is going to remain stagnant. In a 10-person, it's going to be like this, up and down and up and down. When it's in a 50-person, it's a little more steady, a little rocky. When you get in 100, that pay line from week to week, it's nice and in the middle. So you know exactly the type of lineup to go in. By the way, I'm a mouth breather. So yeah, Bob Harris is a mouth breather too. We're all mouth breathers. So that's my idea for cash games. Building a cash game lineup. All right. I'm going to talk GPP. Trust me, folks. We'll get to that. But I have a 0 fat policy. It's like USDA quality. I want 0 fat on my cash game stake. Here's a little trick that I started doing just a couple years ago. So on a Tuesday morning, I will start out and look at the next slate. Sometimes it's a Wednesday morning, whatever. And I will build 10, 20, maybe even 30 lineups saying, okay, I got to get exposure to the Steelers. I got to get Patriots in there, Saints, of course. I'm going to get exposed. I build a bunch of lineups early in the week. And then all week long, I'm not adding anything. I'm eliminating. Nope. I'm condensing. I'm reshaping, resizing every single day until finally on Saturday night, late Saturday night, early Sunday morning on the East Coast, I'm sitting there with probably 3 lineups. And guys, I'm only a 1 lineup guy for the most part. Although in football, I play 1 cash and 1 GPP lineup. So I'm a 2 lineup guy. But I'll have 3 going into it, and I'll say, okay, where's the fat? What's the downside here? It's kind of like choosing a first-round selection. Like, I can go with, Todd Gurley, Zeke Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, right? Oh, what's wrong with anyone? They're all great. Then you start thinking, and in my mind, Le'Veon Bell's got a new coordinator. Ramon Foster's hurt. He's holding out a contract for the 2nd year. No training camp. He's going to start slow. Do I need to take on that risk? No. He's great. He'll be fine. But I don't need any fat. That to me is fat. Le'Veon Bell is fat. David Johnson, same thing. Yes, he's great, but he did miss a whole season. He was, Northern Iowa guy, not a heavily recruited guy. Bruce Arians is gone. The quarterback situation's unsettled. The wide receiver situation unsettled. Mike Iupati can never stay healthy. So there's enough reason to fade that. So all of a sudden, I've whittled 4 down to 2, and that's the same theory I'm talking about with my cash game lineups. And eventually I come up with just the nut lineup that, oh my God, this is cannot lose. It's really good. I've got a good baseline of points. I've got terrific upside potential here as well. And this is a lineup that I'm almost positive on Sunday morning is going to score 120 or plus and get me into that winning range. So there you go. I like doing that. Another reason I like cash games, I should mention this. I have an addiction problem, and it's not just pornography. It's actually winning. I love the feeling of winning. I don't care. At this age and this part of my life, anything's a win. I make it up the stairs. I'm like, yes, I win. The stairs lose. Everything's a win. I just want to win. I hate at the end of a weekend and the end of a slate of games feeling, I had a major lineup. I had a top 20% lineup. It was great. I almost won 10,000 if one more touchdown would have came through. But no, I didn't, so I win 0. It's the worst feeling, that addiction to winning. That's another thing you have to look introspectively about and decide, like, if that's who you are, if you have that competitive fire, if it's just forget about everybody else, if it's you versus yourself in the mirror and you want to feel like a winner, go to the contest that offer you the best possible chance to do that. Other things in cash games, if we're getting specific, quarterback, wide receiver pairings. I'm okay doing this in any format, cash or GPP. I'm really okay. Ideally, though, it's got to be a great one. You don't want Bortles, D.D. Westbrook. Like that, yeah, could hit, but they also might have 0 catches, right? And Bortles maybe Fournette runs the ball 28 times. That's not a good pairing. Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, that's pretty good pairing. Brady, Edelman when he's back from suspension, that's pretty good pairing. Brandon Cooks and Goff versus a terrible defense like the Seattle Seahawks will be this year. That's pretty good pairing, major upside. So that kind of stuff you definitely can do. I still think cash games are best off, and we saw it last year continuously, built around the running back position for the same reason that we're drafting them 9 out of the top 12 in ADP and seasonal. Same exact philosophy. They're dependable. They're rock solid. They're steady. Me and Bob fight about this sometimes on the air. I'm not a pass-catching running back guy. I'm just not that guy in seasonal or daily. Yes, it could be amazing in a matchup or whatever. You absolutely could. Duke Johnson, Sony Michel, Rex Burkhead. These guys are great. But give me a Gurley, Bell, a guy who will carry it 30 times or carry it 18 times with 8 targets. Give me a guy just with the most touches possible, most volume. I don't want to rely on pass catches out of the running back position. That's one thing me and Bob always fight on, and I'm not letting him interrupt here. So, Bob, take that. There we go. But yeah, so I build around rock steady running backs. I will pay up for running backs. Now, obviously, you always look for value. If there is a day where Leonard Fournette's injured, that foot's acting up in week 4, and we don't get the news till Thursday or Friday, that's terrific because TJ Yeldon's going to be minimal priced and he's going to get a similar workload and a good offense, and it's perfect, right? So that's the case. I like to build around, that's an obvious value guy. That's where you don't have to pay up for those running backs. And then at wide receiver, again, in cash games, I'm not going to build around. I love old man value. I love Michael Crabtree. Give me, I'm like eating a bag of Cheetos. I'm sucking the cheese off of the Michael Crabtree fingertip because it's so delicious. All he does is produce numbers, and it's not the sexiest. He's not a 10-plus touchdown guy, even though they're using him in the red zone right now, big time in practice. It's not like that. It's just he's always under the radar. He's always very low priced, and he's consistently getting targets. Was that way in Oakland. I don't think it's going to change here in Baltimore either. So old man value at wide receiver. Don't overlook it. Don't always be obsessed with who gets the long pass or the big touchdown or the massive. You don't need the risk. That's why I say no fat in cash games. Talk about GPP. I talked about bankroll. Let's talk about GPPs here as well. I'll take some questions here if you guys have them in the chat room. But with GPPs, you got to be more aggressive. This is one where you have to have fat. GPP life, tournament life, qualifier life is really about you versus the machine. Anybody who plays chess and had those automatic Kasparov machines as a kid, like I did, like it's you versus the artificial intelligence. Like you got to outthink it, outwit it. Same scenario with these games. It's the best advice I ever got and ever have lied and said I made up and told other people that it was all my idea was people saying, find a great player, a terrific player that's just outside the spotlight, that nobody's on that week. You know what I mean? There are so many great players around. I mean, you want to talk about a guy like Jordan Howard's a great player, right? But nobody's excited about playing him ever. Very rarely, unless he gets a terrific matchup. But let's think that AJ Green, even like second rounders, AJ might be a bad example, but a guy like that, McKinnon, Derrick Henry, Lamar Miller, like good players that are in a given week, Kareem Hunt, somebody who's just, people, they all know, okay, he's a great player, a good player, but they're not on him that week. If you can get him for 10% or less and ideally 5% or less, that's when you go in on those guys. That's why a lot of very experienced and great GPP players, tournament players, use multiple lineups. Right? They want exposure to all different guys. Yeah, they know Zeke Elliott and Melvin Gordon are the best fits today at running back, but they're going to use Zeke because they know he's chalk. But instead of Melvin Gordon, they're going to use Jordan Howard or Joe Mixon in a similar matchup at similar player that if something happens, game flow doesn't go right for Gordon, he doesn't get the volume that we've been leaning on or get in the end zone. This other player at 5% could jump up ahead of it all. So that's sort of the game theory and gamesmanship that we need to have, especially when we're playing tournaments. In cash games, we can get away with it. We don't have to be very smart, Michael. We could just sit there and do the obvious, do the chalk, let everybody else beat them. Let 50% or 51% beat themselves, and we're in the cash. In GPP, you really have to finish on top 5%, 15% payout, but who cares? I mean, it's not a big payout. Hey, I played a $20 Millie Maker and I finished in the money. How much you win? $16. Okay, wait, you put in 20, you won 16. I don't know. My accountant hates when I do that. So that's not a good financial decision, even though you had a great lineup, even though it finished in the money. The game theory thing, whole lineup doesn't have to be different. Remember, you can go with a cash game base in your lineup. Let's say you love the quarterback run or wide receiver combo. You could use that same thing in a GPP, but alter it a little bit. Use somebody else, maybe a DJ Moore starting to get hot and Funchess is hurt, or they're playing the Falcons. Carolina and Atlanta always seem to run up the scoreboard when they play each other. So a guy like DJ Moore might have a huge effort, and that's your one. A common problem people do in GPPs is they will throw together 9-10 players, all weird, different, contrarian players. That's not going to work. You're not going to hit all 10. You're not gonna, it's like Jen Ryan was talking about with the parlay. Like, you're not going to hit a 10-team parlay. Do a 2, 3, 4 if you're crazy parlay. That's good. You're going to get a nice return. Don't go home going 9-team parlay. Good Lord. At that point, you just play Powerball. And you have you get 7 numbers in Powerball, you're going to win billions of dollars. So that's the better idea. I don't like quarterback running back pairings. I really don't. I know some people may like it. I guess it comes down to I don't like pass catching running backs. I just don't like relying on pass catching running backs. That's my thing. And it's never been my thing, even in full point PPR contests and leagues. So I don't like having a quarterback and running back combination. People will tell you that's contrarian. It's true. To me, in a GPP, I don't want to celebrate while one of my players are sitting there not celebrating. That only works if they're scoring 40 plus in a game, and that's well and good. The Saints, 5 years ago, but that's really hard to come by this day and age. So I don't like using I don't like stacking, to be honest with you. I'll do like mini stacks, game theory stacks. My live final that I won was a game stack. I used Breeze, and I think it was Colston was the receiver at the time, and they did play Atlanta that game. And I had who did I have? Oh, Julio Jones, I know, is on the other side. I had like 2 guys from each team only. It wasn't a giant game stack, but it was like a pinball. Bing, 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 bing. They kept going back and forth. and I just kept going up and up in the standings. So that's the way I like to do things as far as GPPs are concerned. Kickers on FanDuel, I don't know. Don't pay up for kicker very often, right? Bob, you can join in on this, man.
Right.
I don't like paying up for kickers. I do like paying up for defense and special teams. Last year, I had this thing, Jaguars and cash. I used the Jaguars 12 out of 17 weeks, 13 out of 7. I mean, and even when they got up there, I'm like, screw it. I'm not chancing defense and special teams. I'm not a lucky guy. I went with the chalk defenses, Bob.
Right, and paying for them. I mean, that's part of it as well. A couple of things that you mentioned that I wanted to text about.
Yeah, bro.
The notion of taking, like, okay, so we have a running back we expect to have a great game. The game script's going to call for that team to get out in front and him to be running. The other team's playing catch-up. You pivot those, you work off those kind of angles much?
Sure. Game theory, game script, as we call it, is huge. If you don't have to hit on 16 games, if you can pick out 2 to 3 games a week where you know how it's going to go down, whether one team wins or loses, it's going to be close, high scoring, low scoring. You need 2 to 3 of those games. You could fill out a cash or GPP lineup and you could smash the earth with it. So a great example from this year, Bob, would be like Todd Gurley. I mean, I know Gurley's number 1, but the Rams defense is so improved, so dramatically improved, at least on paper and with Aaron Donald, but they're not going to play from behind much, right?
Nope.
Jared Goff, I project in the lower third of the league in pass attempts, simply don't need it. So Woods, Cooper Kupp, Cooks, little worried, but Gurley, hammer them all day, all long. Stuff like that. When you get a matchup like that, I think you could definitely take advantage.
I like to get into a couple little more things, so we may run a little over the time if that's okay with you, Jeff.
I got all night, baby.
I know you do. Look, I think one of the things that I know about you, because we're there on Sunday morning, I know what you go. But talk a little bit about how you determine. You are very confident in your picks. Explain why you are so confident.
And I think it's experience, really. Bob, it's like, I mean, you probably were the one that really installed it in me early on, years and years ago, where you say it all the time. We've seen it before. We've seen this go down. This guy's got scratched. This guy gets hurt. Like, we've seen these things before. So the confidence comes that I've done all the research. I've put in hours and hours of work. I've really pared down to the absolute no fat grizzle, no fat steak. It's the best situation. And then what happens. I'm not going to win every week. There's no question about it. But I think that's kind of where the confidence comes from, and knowing that there's nothing else I could do. I didn't miss, like, oh my God, this Aaron Rodgers is good against the cover 2. Oh my God, I didn't know that. It's like, no, I know. His pass rating is 118. It's amazing. Like, so, I've done all the work, and I think that's where it comes from.
GPP's ownership numbers. How do we determine that? How do we take advantage of that? Is it just guesswork until after the fact?
Social media. Look at, different sites, who listen to Sirius XM radio and the Football Die Hard show and Guru Elite show or whatever. Listen to what people are saying. Listen to what the callers are saying. I know some of us tune off callers, but that's our peers. Those are our competitors in DFS especially. Look at what Twitter's saying and Instagram and Facebook. Just pay attention to it. You'll hear some analysts like Bob Harris and or myself talk about, well, everybody's into Alshon Jeffrey this week, and for whatever reason. And that's how you get a better gauge of ownership. It's not an exact science, but you usually, with good investigators, put it this way. Here's what I'll say. Act like your girlfriend, husband, or wife is like spending a lot of time on computer, and you're just happen to nose around. Use that mentality to try to figure out ownership. You'll do just fine. Start
reading the other people's texts. That's exactly what you're doing.
Get their phone and be like, your phone was down. What's your passcode? And boom, now you have ownership.
I have Jeff Barrett's phone in my hand. And I guess, something that Jen mentioned, and we've talked about a little earlier, Armando, is weather. I always make the same stupid joke. I want to be the fantasy fireman. I want to run into the burning building of value and drag out the bodies. When I see weather, I know everyone's running away from that game. I want to run towards it. I want to get some of that because I think everyone's running away. your thoughts on weather and how it impacts games. What's your experience with it?
Boy, Bob, that is literally the part of the advice based on the experience and the confidence. You say it all the time. We will sit there on a Sunday morning in October, late October, where it's not quite cool yet, but people are starting to wonder. And it's like 18-mile-an-hour winds. And it's like, oh, I'm not using Tom Brady. No way. I can't use Drew Brees in that. And you sit there and you've been the captain of this for years saying, it's wind. They'll be fine. Like these are professional athletes and quarterbacks who play in this all the time. They played in Drew Brees played at Purdue. He did fine. You know what I mean? He's going to be okay. So don't overreact to weather. It's different when you have like whiteout conditions and snow. Then it's an absolute cluster, and I will fade that game and just hope we don't have LaShawn McCoy against the Bears outing like a couple years ago where he gets 5 touchdowns. I'll fade that. Wind of 30 or more or something crazy. Yes. Other than that, yeah.
There is a level, right, that, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to ignore the wind. I do that with injuries. I'm totally injury agnostic, much to my dismay at some point during the season, which brings us to another point of injuries. Just there's no need in DFS. There's no need to deal with that, right?
With what? Weather?
Injuries.
Oh, No, yeah. Exactly. It's kind of like the same philosophy, no fat on the steak. That's a big hunk of grizzle right there. When somebody's got a hamstring, but he's probable, he's fine. I don't know. If somebody's missing practice early in the season, especially non-veterans, that terrifies me. And yeah, there's no need, as long as it's not such an obvious matchup. This is a counterintuitive situation where, let's say a guy is injured, but he's going to be 75, 80% owned. Now, and if you're playing cash games, you don't want to fade that, because if he goes off and he's going to be that high owned, you're going to be too far behind should he go off. But in GPPs, now all of a sudden you could play that guy who's slightly injured, or you play a different guy, who's slightly injured at 50+%, and you use that healthy guy, and then all of a sudden, what do you know? Hamstring acted up in the first quarter, and 70% of your opponents are taken out. I love that philosophy.
We're talking stacking. We've been talking it all night. And a question from the audience. What about stacking the running back with a good D?
Oh yeah, that's an old school philosophy. I like it. I think there's it's a volume thing. There's a lot of ways to look into that. It's like you want to do that ideally when you have the time of possession in your favor and the pace of play works out as well. Because the idea is that the running back gets all these touches, and that keeps the defense off the field and keeps points off the board. That's ideal. But then Chip Kelly came along and did this crazy thing where it's go, 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 go. And all of a sudden, some of us got caught like, oh, wait, the defense has been on the field plenty, and the running back is touching the ball a lot. So that kind of it's a good correlation for sure, one of the better ones, but it's not a perfect science, really matchup based.
So, good man knows his limitations. Clint Eastwood once told us in a Dirty Harry movie, Magnum Force, I think it was. Do you know your limitations? What are they?
Playing fantasy sports. I'm just not good at that thing. My limitations, a lot. A couple of them. Stay away from narrative. Well, not all narratives. Your own personal narratives. Like when I have an idea or a theory that's not proven. Again, in a GPP, you have to get any advantage you can. If intuition's one of them, go with it. But in a cash game lineup, the fact that I think that the Bears are going to run it up against Ron Rivera because he used to play there, take that out of it. Great big time thing that a lot of folks do. I've had to learn to abide by it, is not play your favorite players or favorite teams. I live near David Johnson. I love him. I've interviewed him twice. I've met him and his wife. He is a special, great human being that I really admire and like. And my kid wears his jersey. Yet I have him 8th in my board for the season long. It's not about my personal feelings. I root for the kid. I love the kid. The Cardinals in my backyard. Everything's great, but I got to go with what I know and got to go with what the information is telling me and what the stats are telling me. And it's telling me that I don't know how he's going to react in an offense that's not led by Bruce Arians. So those are definitely limitations. I think taking on too much risk as well. when I won the live final back in 2015 in baseball, the first one, I started chasing and I started pumping money because I was addicted to the feeling of esteem and my colleagues and Bob Harris telling me, hey, good job, buddy. I'm like, yeah, I got to do it again. I felt like I have to keep doing it. And it took me a year probably to really learn, like, dude, that's ridiculous. You just lost $30,000 chasing a $100,000 dream. It's stupid. Why would you do that? So, those limitations as well, knowing that's why I started out this conversation with understand the kind of player you are, because me chasing the high payouts, it's not a good financial decision. And quite frankly, I mean, I have a wife and 3 kids to support, and I can just throw money away like that as much as I want to think I can because, hey, I won so much. It's just my house. It doesn't work that way.
I have cats, so I can throw away whatever I want.
Yeah. What if he didn't get cat chow one day because you're throwing money at pass catching running back?
He would eat me. That would be the problem. By the way, in case you didn't know, this is Jeff Mans from Guru Elite. Great site. A lot of stuff going on. You can follow him on Twitter at Jeff_Mans. You can hear him every single day on the Sirius XM. What time? The time zones confuse me. Tell me the time.
2 to 4. 2 to 4 Eastern. I don't know. It's 11 to 1 Mountain.
Yeah, it's all very. I don't know. We all talk Eastern time, and we will be on again Sundays pregame. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern every Sunday morning. We will be talking through these various things every single Sunday before the game. Jeff will be changing lineups desperately during breaks, and I will be talking longer, just like he'll be talking longer when I'm trying to put up news.
If you hear this, yeah, Bob, what's going on in New Orleans today? That's me frantically. By the way, I'll send that message to the chat room.
Right.
Frantically changing lineups.
Yes, and it happens quite a bit. And there's some swearing on the breaks. You'll be surprised to learn.
Not me.
A little bit.
I'm a Jesus man.
Jeff Mans, Jesus man. You heard it here first, Guru Elite. Thank you very much, Jeff. Couldn't be happier to have you on, and a great presentation. I'm sure it's very helpful.
I'm honored. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody, for doing this great thing. Emil and you, and this is great for the industry, great for everybody. I appreciate you making me a part of it. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Have a good night. And so there we have it. That's it for this evening's presentation. I want to thank everybody, Armando Marsal, Bobby Gomez, Jen Ryan, Casey Joyner, the football scientist, and even Jeff Mans from Guru Elite. Again, you can hit my Twitter feed to find all their Twitters. I'm at Football Diehard. We will be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night for the last night. It's a best ball draft. We're going to crank it up at about 9 o'clock and run through it, analyze picks as we go along. We've got a great cast of drafters for that. In case you missed it, it's Jeff Ratcliffe, myself, Mike Dempsey, my Sirius co-host during the weekdays, Jen Ryan, Mike Beers from Best Ball Command. He might be good at this as well. John Law, Bobby Gomez, Emil Cadlick, Hussein the Brain, Brad Cruz, Gary Davenport, Casey Joyner, all in for the best ball. So be back tomorrow. In the meantime, and really appreciate the feedback, appreciate the interaction. You've all been fantastic, and we'll catch you tomorrow night.